For local health officer, and Liz over there, you know, Liz Stark, the public health director. And Liz and I are doing this together because we've not ever done this before, so we're charting new territory. As you all know, Dr. Cohen resigned as the local medical officer after serving us dutifully for since at least 2007, and before that he was serving community health services. The Public Health Act requires that that counties have a local medical officer who is a physician when the public health director is not a physician. And so we are required to have a physician as a local medical officer. We've used the local medical officer to advise the Board of Health on upcoming issues related to public health, and also Community Health Services uses the local medical officer not only for their board but primarily to advise Liz and the public health director if there are outbreaks or protocols that she needs to consider in their practice. Liz, the public health director, convened a group of subject matter experts, which included C.J. Oliver from Environmental Health City, and Jim Moran, who's on the board of Community Health Services, and me and Liz to interview. We had 4 candidates that we interviewed for the local health officer, and Dr. Levin definitely stood out as our #1 candidate, and I'm going to have Liz go from there.
So I guess I would just like to briefly introduce Dr. Levin to you. I think in your packet you received her CV, but she's currently practicing emergency medicine. That's her specialty in the area at Aston Valley Hospital, Grand River Hospital, and Valley View Hospital, and has a master's in public health. Was her first degree, and then went on to get her MD after that. We selected Dr. Levin based on her educational background, a master's in public health, as well as her community interest. And you can ask her more about this, but she serves in many different capacities in the community, on the homeless shelter board, the Woody Creek Community Center's medical clinic, and just seemed to have a real passion and interest in local public health issues, and also a desire to really be a part of public health in our community and expand on her public health background. So we are very pleased to have selected her as our top priority, and would like to offer you as the board members to ask her any questions you may have, or and make this official, we hope.
Good. Liz, what sort of time commitment usually does a medical officer have to commit to this position?
The primary time commitments are the meetings. As you know, we meet with you quarterly, and then we also ask that this person serve on the Community Health Services Board of Directors, our nonprofit board, sort of as the liaison between you as the Board of Health and our Community Health Services Board. So those meetings are monthly. And aside from that, it's really variable. It depends on what's going on in the community. I might go weeks or months without contacting the medical officer, depending on what's going on. But we, as you remember, during H1N1, when we had a real public health emergency, Dr. Cohen was up front and center, and during that time, in terms of being the face of public health and being a spokesperson for us. And so that was a special circumstance, and we hope that in that event something like that could occur again. I might give a call to this person maybe once a month just to confer about new public health, whether it be new immunization recommendations, women's health issues, really to get that medical guidance. So it's mostly just a phone call periodically, unless there's something major going on, in addition to the meetings.
All right, great, thank you. Questions from the board? Rachel and Rob?
Sure. Well, thank you for being here, Dr. Levin, and greatly appreciate you applying for the position. In your own words, why would you like to serve?
And I want to thank Nan and Liz for the introductions and for selecting me. I'm excited for this position. I've always had an interest in public health, and working in emergency medicine, there are public health issues that we see every day in the ER, and this is a great opportunity for me to be more of a part of that in a bigger scope, and just be more involved in the community level in terms of working in public health.
Okay. Thank you.
Rob?
Thanks for applying. I don't know if you remember, but we met for the first time on
I
the
do.
top of
Maroon. Yeah, that's
handstands, and I got this great picture of the four of us
This is a
holding
true
you
story.
vertical, like we're going to throw you off of the mountain.
This is a true story.
When I went to the emergency room, I cut off the tip of my finger, and I think it was someone else that stitched me up, but she was
Right.
attending to me as well.
I
So
remember
it's
that too.
Healing very well, almost all the feeling back in my
Excellent.
fingers. So thank you very much for all of that. Good times. My question, and another thing kind of ironically, is I was in Burlington from '04 to '06 as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Bourbon Street Grill and Mona's and several other restaurants.
I didn't know.
Anyway, we're glad that you're applying. My question is, what scares you most about your position?
What scares me most? I'm not scared by it at all. First of all, I'm really excited about it. My only concern about it was time commitment, and I want to be able to do, the best job I can, and really put time into it that it needs, and as well as doing all my clinical work and everything else. So, it sounds like from the meetings and everything that I make myself available as much as possible and put in the best I can, make it work.
Great.
Maybe as a follow-up, just a slightly different slant, what do you see as the critical issues to facing the community? What's sort of out on the horizon? I know we've got the new Healthcare Act, but that's more of sort of an administrative process for Liz. But what do you see as some of the community critical issues?
It's a good question. I think one issue is access to care in the community, that there's a lot of people that need better access to care. In terms of, I think community health does a wonderful job in terms of creating better access and being able to address like infectious disease issues, and I'd have to look into it more actually to figure out what the real issues are, but I don't think there's anything glaring.
You see issues in the ER that sort of come up regularly. What kinds of things would those be?
There's always, in every community, in this community, there's always a big drug and alcohol issue, and just looking at the paper today, it looks like there's a new nonprofit that's being formed in place of the Right Door, which I think was a critical community program that is no longer, so hopefully that will help to address that. So definitely, in this community, psychiatric issues as well, which I think a lot of people know about, and the Hope Center, and there's other initiatives being done to address that, which I think are excellent.
All right, thank you. Steve?
Thank you for applying for this position. We appreciate your time. I notice sounds like you have a very busy schedule because you work at the hospital in Rifle as well as the clinic
Right.
in Basalt and then the
I do, yeah.
Aspen Valley Hospital. So how much time do you spend at each of the locations?
It's a little bit variable. I work part-time at Aspen Valley Hospital, and then just kind of fill in at these other hospitals. So it's probably about 50% time here and at Rifle. Yeah, and that I'll work in as best I can in terms of making time for meetings and in emergency it's shifts are days, evenings, and overnights, so the schedule gets a little bit crazy sometimes, but do my best to work it all in.
If we had a medical type emergency, such as an outbreak of pertussis or of West Nile virus or some such disease, what would be your approach to dealing with that?
In terms of dealing with the public, or in terms of
Well, yeah,
just
what would,
the...
in this position, what steps would you take or would you recommend to the public?
I mean, I think it'd be critical to educate the public on what the issue is and how to prevent. I mean, in terms of public health, the main issue is prevention. And so how do you prevent, and how do you immunize and prevent from further spread, and educating people on what the real issue is in the community. A lot of people and a lot of illnesses have no idea how things are spread and what they should do. And so I think that'd be a critical point. Public education, and then working with community health to make it available for immunization and treatment and that kind of thing.
Do you have any, I know a lot of people or parents are concerned about immunizing their children, and that leads to outbreaks occasionally and different things. And what's your opinion towards childhood immunizations?
I think it's education. I think, historically immunizations work, and they, in some cases, have completely eradicated disease. So, I mean, my stance is that I'm supportive of them, and people who choose not to, because it's obviously personal decisions not to immunize, and it's obviously not legal, it's not a law that you have to, that as long as people are educated correctly about what their decision is and what the impact might be in a public health viewpoint, it's the best you can do. You can't force people to immunize, so, but there's real outcomes, can be real outcomes to not immunizing.
Okay, thank you.
And also just educating people on some of the false beliefs about immunizations and what they can lead to. So, yeah.
Other questions, Michael?
No questions, thank you, Kim.
Okay, thanks.
Well, with that, it's good to hear that even with all your other duties, you have time to enjoy the outdoors here and sort of find a balance in your life, so that's good
Great.
to know.
Find crazy people on the mountain.
So do we need a motion to accept Dr. Levine as our medical officer for community health?
I just have a question, because I think the appointment happens by resolution and contract. So I think you guys can make a motion here, and then I'll follow up with a resolution and a contract.
So this was a new process for us, and we did a multi-level process to bring subject matter experts in to review from a technical perspective, and then brought a recommendation to you as a board. And so what we were looking for today is direction from the board to bring a resolution back. It doesn't require a formal motion from you at this point. It's administrative direction, but I think what we're looking for is that, yes, you're comfortable with us bringing that resolution forward to do the formal appointment. And this was an opportunity, similar to how we do boards and commissions. You do kind of the interview, and we received some direction to bring a resolution back. This is a little bit different in that it's more of a technical expert staff position rather than an advisory board kind of position.
And
But we're
there's
using a similar
stipend,
process.
so it's a contract.
And it's a contract.
Okay, so Michael?
Nan or Liz, what is the term? And is there a term here? I mean, are we appointing for 3 years?
That's a really good
or-
question. There is not a term that's designated by the state. We used 3-year terms with Dr. Cohen, just simply to always give him an option to get out if he wanted to. So, I was thinking we would do that again with Dr. Levin.
And that would be reflected in the resolution?
Yes.
The other way you could do it is, as the board in your commissioner role has done this with other contract employees, is to have a contract that automatically renews on an annual basis with a termination clause. For some reason, either Dr. Levins wants to do something else, or if the board wants to go a different direction. And administrator, you can always maintain that ability to terminate a contractual relationship with an automatic renewal. That would be consistent with what you've done with other contract employees, and is probably the easiest to administer.
So, should we do that, board?
Fine with me.
Is that acceptable to you?
Sounds fine.
Okay, so given that, everyone's in favor of Dr. Levine coming on board?
Excellent.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that was a new process for us, and we weren't sure how long that was going to take. I guess we can
grill it a
time
little bit
those.
more.
I know.
It's just Ask more questions.
All right, so, let's see, we can maybe go into future agendas.
We can. The one item I wanted to talk to you about is August 20th. We have a meeting scheduled right now, I believe. I'm trying to get out there.
It's the bike race.
That is the bike race day. The only thing that we have on there right now is really prepping for the EOTC meeting. That's something we could probably find an earlier time to, I just lost my whole.
I might actually be out of town too that week.
August 20th.
And so what's happening that day, that's the day of the start, so that's the second day of the race, and so the start will be happening right in front of this building. So a lot of the roads are going to be shut down in the morning. We'd anticipate in the afternoon they'd be opening back up. So we have a choice of either moving the EOTC meeting and canceling that day, or we could probably schedule something for later in the afternoon, and that would give public an opportunity to be here. But just wanted to get some feedback from the board. We are going to be really doing the lockdown of this building in the morning until the afternoon, as we have in past years.
I'll be in Woody Creek that day, so.
We could have the meeting there if
Yeah,
you'd like it.
if you want.
Okay, so Michael, you're not going to be here. Rob, you may not be here. It may be better just to go ahead and
I'm
cancel
not
the
here.
meeting.
The 20th.
I'm out.
And we're going to cancel that meeting, and we'll just go ahead and reschedule that EOTC prep. I just wanted to get that out before we started adding things in there. And we're still working on some of the dates for like the items that were requested, for example, TDR discussion and such that were requested last time.
On the future agendas, the Tuesday, the July 9th, and Tuesday, the July 16th, both start with the exact same thing. I'm not sure if it's a cut and paste error, but it's the MOU regarding Energy Smart and then the reallocation of rent funds. So there's two different.
Yeah, and we're working on, no, those are going to end up on one day. We've held both days for those things right now because we haven't been able to finalize our schedule with everyone that needs to be there. So
Make sure.
thank you, I should have mentioned that.
Okay. Anybody else have anything on for future agendas? Michael?
I won't be on the 2nd.
July 2nd. Yeah, and you had told us that last time, so
It's not reflected in
must
the
not have been,
record.
okay.
Okay, so that's it for future agendas. I know for memos of interest, we're going to have some staff coming in. So maybe we could tackle one or two of those things now.
Yeah, I think we could tackle items probably 4 and 5.
You know what I never did, though? Let me interrupt you. I never adjourned our special meeting as a Board of Health, so we should probably need to do that.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, are you ready for me to move on to memos
Yes.
of interest? So, I think we'll just take the last two because we have staff coming in for the other items. We have a thank you letter from Project Graduation at Basalt High School. This is for a grant that was given through the Healthy Community Fund. And then the other item that we have is CCI and is once again seeking legislative issues for the upcoming legislative session. We did have a discussion at the section leader meeting, and right now we do not have specific issues. I think there were a couple that we're tracking. For example, last year there was a proposal around airport fees that we were in opposition to. That has not come back formally, but we're hearing some rumblings that that may be an issue that comes back our way. And so we'll more just have to keep you posted on that. The other issues that we continue to track have to do with human service funding and such, but that's being handled, I think, through committees at CCI right now, so we're kind of monitoring those, so they're not really ripe for an issue. The only one that came up from staff's perspective, which is one that we ran up the flagpole last year without success, is the environmental health fees for restaurant inspections and providing more flexibility for local jurisdictions to set those. That was a proposal that we had made last year, and I believe, did we make the same proposal the previous year?
If I remember correctly, it was put off by the CCI board as a whole because there had been some negotiations with the Restaurant Association, and there had been some modest adjustment a few years prior, and they just didn't feel it was time to go back to raise that issue again. For some counties it's not an issue at all. For other counties, it is a cost to their budget because they're not able to break even on the fees. And I think it is a cost to us as well, $15,000 a year or something like that.
Well, we actually have a agenda item tomorrow on Wednesday's agenda where we're approving the contract for those restaurant inspection services and the contribution from the state. Now, it may be appropriate for us to have a discussion about that being a legislative item or not at that time when we have Kurt here, but that was the only one that came up as a possibility at this point at the staff level. There's a lot that we're monitoring, and we're kind of waiting to see if and what proposals come forward and if we need to respond to them, but there was nothing that was really ripe as far as from staff's perspective in putting together the CCI legislative issues. However, we don't know if there's any items that the board would like us to do some prep work on, and so we wanted to use some of this time to maybe open that up to see if there are legislative items from the board's perspective that you wanted us to prepare for CCI's consideration.
Okay, Rachel?
Yeah, clearly it's very awkward for all of us to try to anticipate what type of legislation we might need in January, in June. But it is part of their process so that they can vet these items, and just kind of explain them largely to the different districts during the summer get-together meetings when CCI travels out to the areas. I think that will probably be in August. Sometime will be the district meeting for our district. But then they will talk about them more thoroughly in September and have a final vote in October as to what will be the legislative agenda. Then they will find sponsors, and they will start to try to get it introduced in January. So that's their process, and it is, again, awkward because it feels like the legislative session just ended. The one item, I think historically, looking back, we've had some success with things, particularly the real estate evaluations related to agricultural properties. You brought that one forward. It went pretty far. The one issue we have brought forward before, which did not receive enough support to move forward, and I think would be worth bringing up again, that Michael Owsley had suggested, was changes to the codes related to the senior property tax exemption. And I think it is that if you're earning any, quote, income off your property, then you're not eligible. And as Michael had presented, and I think it's accurate, that, what if you're renting one bedroom out to someone to help you make the mortgage and stay in your house and maybe even caretake a little bit, but now if you report that income or if you're honest about it, you no longer qualify for that property tax exemption. I think it was shot down before in many ways because the economy is so bad and the state was cutting every single program they could, and so people didn't want to throw that out there with an unknown fiscal note to it. And I don't know exactly how we would address that, but I do think it's worth bringing up again and seeing where they would go. It would be something for Nan to research a little bit. One of the elements that helped defeat it was actually how successful, I think it was Boulder County or some of the other counties were in signing seniors up for that program, that they had 1,500 or 1,600 seniors getting property tax deferrals. Mm-hmm. And so people were concerned, well, what would this mean across the state? So I do think that is worth bringing forward. It is something that may help some of our seniors stay in their home longer and not be faced with that issue of selling and moving to another community.
Michael?
Thanks for bringing that up, Rich. One of the other problems was that it's not a deferral. I think the deferral exists now. I mean, you can defer your property taxes. But the allowance part of it is, seems generous in some areas. It might seem generous in Conejos County, but it's not generous in big counties because the land values are so high. So there has to be some formula that tracks, your land values and the amount of tax you're paying on it versus a meaningful deduction, essentially, because it's just not meaningful in Pickett County. And I think the effort really is, as you referred to, is keeping a viable community with people who can afford to stay here past retirement. And that's important.
It just seems if the board agrees, perhaps John can have Tom Oken and Nan get together to understand the intersection between tax law and senior needs and senior programs, and present us with a form to submit. I think that's due at the end of this week.
Yes.
The 28th.
Yeah.
Okay. So that would be good.
The other one that was submitted last year that didn't get traction, you might have some history on, is we were looking for the ability for a county real estate transfer tax.
Yeah.
Which I don't think went anywhere.
I don't think it went anywhere, and it would require a statewide ballot to change Tabor. We certainly could bring it up again, but there's no reason to put anything on the ballot that you can't raise $4 or $5 million to promote a successful election, and so that's the challenge with that. Generally reforming Tabor is something that's on a lot of people's headline. We talked about Gallagher a few years back, but people were just tremendously afraid to open up the current Pandora's box and see what comes out and see what you could get back in the box. Who knows? And I think, oddly enough, our own school district is a good example of that, because while the state has gone out to reform education funding, I think our district is like the only loser district in the entire program. And I simply don't know if there is any legislative fix that could happen. I've thought about that at one time, raising of our base, because we're a community that lost they totally eliminated the high cost of living area credit to certain districts or allocation. And we're still a high cost of living area, but we lost that. And so I wasn't sure if there was any way to raise the base for those communities. But I still have a hard time thinking there's going to be a lot of sympathy to go back in and amend that legislation or an add-on to that legislation for one district that's perceived to be a wealthy district. And as I've heard it kind of put back to me, well, it really just means that, at least there's no longer a mill levy cap on your school district, and your school district can take care of its own issues now with a vote of the public to increase their taxes to, fill this gap. But previously we were capped, and you wouldn't be able to even ask for what you need.
Okay. That's good. Steve?
I've got a couple of things. I just jotted down notes during CCI meetings and whatnot, but one has to do with Senate Bill 252, which was the Renewable Energy Standards Bill that passed this year and was signed by Governor Hickenlooper. But there were deficiencies in that bill, I thought, and one was it doesn't allow the rural electric associations to use hydroelectric projects as part of their renewable portfolio. Doesn't allow for geothermal and ground-based heat exchange systems for credit, and doesn't allow energy efficiency upgrades to be counted for credit. That's at least my understanding of that bill, based on criticism from around the state. And I have a feeling that the issue's probably going to come up again this next year with rural counties trying to amend it. And I thought it'd be good if we weigh in on that and try to have, logical and good amendments to the bill to improve it and maybe make it more palatable to the rural electric associations around the state.
I would be interested in responding to that as it comes up. I don't know that promoting them in advance, that we need to be the ones opening that door. Holy Cross Electric was neutral on this bill. They thought it was valuable and they could reach that. I would want to do a lot more research. I know why hydro has been left out before from the renewable standards, and that was simply because a lot of the electric power companies were going to buy existing hydro projects. Suddenly they've made their quota and there's no new green energy produced. And I think there's also issues that we need to be concerned about in terms of healthy rivers and streams, and people really didn't seem to want a hydro on the Crystal and to dam that for those purposes. And so there's just a lot of contradictory issues related to hydropower production. And perhaps a conversation with Senator Schwartz would give us more background as to why some of these other elements were not included or supported. And energy efficiency upgrades, I believe that's something that people should be doing themselves, as opposed to saying, well, we'll keep burning more coal to put on our new growth, and we'll get our credits for people reducing their energy bills and taking advantage of other tax credit programs anyhow. I don't know that really moves the needle or the ball that much. But I'd be happy to see what comes forward from other REAs. In talking to Senator Schwartz and others, it was that this is a far easier standard to meet than any of these REAs are letting on, and that it's just a matter of investing in something other than coal for future planning. So I just don't think that one's ripe for us to try to preempt it.
Okay. A second issue I wrote down that I think is applicable, and it has to do with statewide broadband access. And then I wrote in parentheses, this will help with voting reform. And I think it had to do with the whole effort to do this statewide, changing the voting system in the state and making it more accessible. And that's where it mentioned broadband as one way that could be made to work better. And since we've been working on the broadband thing, maybe we could push for more of a statewide effort, which could include in this case pushing for legislation.
Legislation to do what, though? I mean, you have to get so specific with...
Well, I think when I wrote this down, it was because we were looking at the whole voting reform system and how how to make it work for the rural counties.
Is there a deadline for the CCI issues that
For
we need to
the
get?
CCI issues there are, so, I mean, and it's coming up towards the end of the month here. Now, Rachel, sometimes they've allowed another bite at that apple a little bit later in the process.
Yeah,
I don't
well,
know.
two different things. One times they'll take issues and say, okay, well, we're going to move that out of legislative and say that this is, you know, a process, they call it tier 1, tier 2, and tier 2 would be things that we continue to stand for, such as not reducing the airport passenger fees, whether there's a bill or not, we know where we stand on that. And improving broadband throughout the state is one of those things. But that's such a complex issue, I don't know what to suggest before you suddenly have CenturyLink and Sprint and Verizon all in there battling over the funds or how we're trying to do that. And so I just don't know what to suggest in that area, but I think it is a continuing priority for them. So there's that. Then once bills are introduced, the board will vote as to whether to support, be neutral, or oppose. So individual counties sometimes work with their legislator to introduce bills separate from CCI introducing, and then they can be bills that you support or oppose. So that's your second bite at the apple, is responding to other things that have come up.
The reason I ask that is there seems like, as Rachel alluded to on the discussion with the energy, perhaps we just need some more background information and present some of these concerns to our representative. And so I don't know whether has staff had any success in terms of trying to connect with Senator Schwartz for a date?
I don't have an update from Charlotte on that yet.
Okay,
but,
because I know she's in town now, but I think that would be probably important to have a discussion with our state representatives on some of these issues and get a better understanding in terms of what's happened in the past and where perhaps Senator Schwartz thinks might be the next step in some of these issues.
Another alternative, because this is a high priority for the county, and so we've got two planning efforts that we're participating in. You know, one is our local effort that's more focused right now on cell and wireless broadband. But we also are participating with the Northwest Council of Governments on a broader strategic plan that actually covers our region. And I think the outcome of that strategic planning process, which I cannot remember when they're looking to wrap that up. I think it's this fall we should have an initial draft. May give the kind of specifics, Steve, that would allow us to say, is there a legislative item that we would want to pursue or a budgetary item? And so maybe that's one of those issues that we keep on our radar screen. We see through this strategic plan, and when that comes back, that may suggest a legislative item for a region that we could push through with the Council of Governments and such, and our local reps.
Yeah, and then along with the idea in terms of what's going on with election reform, I know that the clerks there's a clerk conference going on right now that they're probably discussing some of those issues, and we can probably get an update from Janice when she gets back.
Yeah, and the immediate issues, I mean, the clerk's offices right now with the bill that's been passed that's requiring really what is essentially vote centers. I think they're calling them service centers now. Those locations are being identified right now, and one of the criteria is having that broadband access, and it's a limiting criteria. And so I think we are going to see more discussion as a result of that about, well, how do we improve broadband access in our communities? And it's for voting, it's for medical record. There's all kinds of systems right now that depend on that kind of statewide linkage. And so I think this is going to be one of many that presses more planning and kind of informs some of the planning efforts that we're doing through Northwest COG right now. So I think we're working on it. It may not be right. We may not know exactly where to go with it until those processes are done.
We could, for sure, there's different strategies for any of these, and our discussion today is driven because CCI is looking
Right.
for issues to put forward as CCI bills. But any of these, for sure, it might be more effective to go through Senator Schwartz or Representative Hamner for having them introduce legislation later, and then we could have their staff working on like vetting the things and getting a really good bill put forward. But in terms of the broadband, thinking about, our most effective thing could be working just regionally and getting a good system in place in Pickens County and in the Northwest Cog region.
Mhm.
And if we can do that, then that could be used as an example for the rest of the state to follow for, putting in a better system in their areas.
Okay, Rachel?
Yeah, thank you, George. I think, just broadly speaking, a lot of the legislative session is about being defensive and kind of preventing harm, unfortunately. We're going to see more of that all-terrain vehicle legislation to be on all streets in all of Colorado. It's a federal licensing issue related to interstate commerce, that if they've licensed a vehicle in Utah, that license should be recognized in Colorado. And we're still arguing for local control on county roads. The water planning, is, as I told you before, they're trying to rapidly accelerate having a statewide water plan. Well, one of those items is to have a legislative water agenda by November of this year to be introduced. Now, I have no idea what that is, but it's probably going to be generated more by people who would like to take water out of the West Slope than by others. And there's going to be a lot of efforts to realign the state permitting and the state processes to speed these things forward. So we're going to need to really work on that. And we're going to see things like the public lands, let's sue the federal government to return all the public lands to the states and things like that. So, it's not as if we have to have a heavy agenda going in, and we'll hear what other counties come up with. Some of those could be very, very different than our own in terms of issues. And so, we'll have a full plate there, one way or the other.
All right, so I think we've covered that pretty well.
And so you'll write up and submit something on the senior housing
Yeah, we'll get
tax credit
something
issue?
put together on the senior housing, and we'll get that distributed to you and Steve for the fun meetings that
Okay.
you have ahead of you.
Okay, so, Michael?
Just on that senior thing, I think at least it should be considered to be a percentage reflection, not a lump sum deal. So it's, whatever, 10% of your bill or wherever you are.
Something
So-
that tracks or scales with value,
Yeah.
really, is, yeah. Got it.
All right, well, why don't we take an early lunch, and we'll be back here at 1 o'clock with,
I can hit one open discussion item if you
Yeah, a
want to
quick
get it
one?
out of the way, just a quick one. I just wanted to let the board know that I did reach out to my counterpart in El Paso County, who, of course, they've been struggling with the Black Forest fire, just to offer, if they have requests for assistance and such, to be sure to contact us. He did respond and said that they may be contacting us during the recovery period. It's a good opportunity for our staff to become engaged in what that response is and such. But I think they may need some help with public works kind of equipment and such to clear trees and get roads open, as well as in their incident management centers as they're trying to organize the recovery period. So if we get a specific request, of course, we'll bring that forward, and we can always back up. I thought as appropriate as we may be in a boat someday of requesting that kind of assistance, that we should reach out.
yeah, that's good.
That's really good.
Along those same lines, given that there was actually fires going on throughout the state, we're sort of surrounded by fires, and last year I had asked the Aspen District Ranger if they would consider putting a fire ban on in all their campgrounds, which they did, and I think it's probably timely to have that ask again. We've had several lightning strikes around, but but we haven't had any human-caused fires, and certainly as we're getting into prime camping season now, I think we should be looking at a fire ban. Comments or?
Good idea.
Yeah, definitely good idea. I was noticing that that fire down by in the Del Norte area is in an area of the state that's been hard hit by a spruce beetle epidemic that's killed like somewhere on the order of 100,000 acres of spruce. And I don't know if the fire is in that area, but it's really close to it if it's not. And I've really been thinking of the different counties and what they're going through, because there's quite a few different fires in Colorado right now. Different county emergency teams are having to deal with that right as we speak.
George, the only caveat that I'd ask is, we're tracking fuel moisture content and such, and we're probably, I don't have a specific date from Joe, but Joe will probably be issuing a fire ban, would be my assumption at some point in the near future. And what may be appropriate is to coordinate that request with any formal county action on fire bans to the National Forest Service. We're not out ahead of the sheriff on his role in that capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I don't believe we had coordinated that so closely last year, because it's just a recommendation to the U.S.
It came
Forest
after.
Service.
It came after we did our fire ban. So it just, I think it would send a clearer message if, once we've reached that point where we implement, that we make that request
Do we know
concurrently.
the timing on that?
I don't know the timing on that
So-
now, but they're doing it based on the fuel moisture content and tracking that, and that once it's a certain point, then we initiate those.
All right, I would just be concerned that we don't get into 2-3 weeks and have the summaries before they get that information done from the sheriff's office. So if it's timely, I think that's fine, but if it looks like it's going to drag on a little bit longer, I think we should have a discussion with the U.S. Forest Service.
Okay.
Rob?
And I would make sure that our outreach is happening for next week for the 4th of July, specifically around fireworks and those issues. So it's one of those time periods where someone near a wooded area shoots off a bottle rocket, and next thing we know, we've got an evacuation on our hands.
And we'll have our other open discussion item, which will come later, is we will have our new fire mitigation coordinator in and talking about some of the things going on there.
Rachel, did you have a hand up?
Well, I was just going to agree with both of you, but when I was in Flagstaff, Arizona, it was the end of May, they were able to issue a fire ban, and there are 3 surrounding national forests, and there are 2 surrounding counties. And it was such a coordinated effort. It really seemed valuable, because it wasn't like, well, can I have a fire here? Yes, if it's in the fire pit, but no, you can't here, and yes, you can here, and no, you can't there. And it really avoided all that type of confusion. It was just straightforward. There's a fire ban, and it was a united announcement. And so I think to the extent that it goes that way, it really gets more impact.
All right, good. Okay, with that, we will break for lunch and be back here at 1 o'clock.
Great.
Okay, welcome. We're back, and we have an immigration update with two honored guests here from Senator Bennett's office. So we've got Sarah Hughes, who's the Deputy Chief of Staff for Senator Bennett, and Noah Coper, who is our Western Slope representative. So welcome, and thank you for coming here. I know you've just come off a luncheon talking about immigration reform, and it's certainly the hot topic in the news today and in the last few days. So perhaps you can let us know. It sounds like the Senate is moving right along in terms of coming up with a bill that they have a majority support, but it looks like it may get hung up in the House, which is, of course, no big surprise given the dysfunction of the House. But so perhaps you could fill us in terms of what's going on and perhaps why it's so important for us in our community to be aware and what we can do and community can do to help perhaps support Senator Bennett's legislation.
Absolutely, would be happy to. So, yeah, I think we're coming back to talk to folks in this community at a crucial point, and that looks like it should be voted, the bill, the Border Security, Economic Opportunity, and Immigration Modernization Act 2013. We jokingly think they should add deficit reduction to the title as well, because the CBO came out with some pretty big estimates of savings, which is huge and crucial for moving forward. But in terms of the timeline, it does look like the Senate will vote it out of off the Senate floor with hopefully close to 70 votes, which is important because we think that gives some more pressure on the House to move forward in a bipartisan manner. I think the higher the bipartisan spirit is in the Senate, hopefully that is contagious and helps us on the House side. We had it on the Senate floor through the course of June, and the hope is that it gets taken up on the House side in July with ideal passage before the August recess, but it may push past the August recess. And ultimately, the hope is that they can at least get something out of the House so that it can go to conference, and then both houses can work on, both chambers can work on a final bill for approval in the late summer, early fall. So that's the timeline. If you'd like, I'm happy to go through some of the broad strokes of the bill and talk about some of the key points about why we think this is important to the region, to the state, and to the country. And also to give some people, we so often hear, gosh, didn't we do this in the past? And how do we make sure that we don't end up in the same place in the future, having this very large undocumented or inappropriately documented population in our country? How do we make sure we avoid that? So does that make sense to kind of cover those two pieces?
That'd be great.
Okay. So to start with this, the latter of the two, how do we make sure we don't end up here again? I think it's really important to point out that this really is a border security bill. And previous versions of the immigration bills that happened in the 80s and then drafts that were circulated in the 90s didn't make the attempts that this bill is making in securing our border, which is obviously very important if we want to reduce the number of people coming into our country inappropriately documented. Another challenge we've had historically is that people come into the country with appropriate documentation, they just don't leave, meaning they overstay their visas, and we've never had a mechanism that allowed us to know if people are overstaying their visas. So this bill also, it tightens the border, but it also helps create a system of exit and entry verification. So we know who's coming into our country, which we've always done a good job at, but we now will know who's leaving the country, and we'll have better sense of folks overstaying visas and so on. Next, the bill attempts to address our employment verification system. Many of you may be familiar with E-Verify, the system employers use to determine whether or not someone is lawfully able to work and work authorized. That system works incredibly well right now. There's a 98.7 or 97.8 effectiveness rate on E-Verify. It does a great job of acknowledging whether or not the Social Security number is linked to that name and that it's a valid Social Security number. What it doesn't do a good job at is knowing whether or not the Social Security number is in fact your Social Security number. And they solve for that in this bill by creating, tasking the Department of Homeland Security to develop a biometric system. And that's no different than the biometric systems we all currently have in our passport. If you've gotten your passport in the last 10 years, you have biometric data in there. The reason this is so good for everyone is it actually reduces the threat of identity theft for everyone. That's the next piece about how we make sure we don't end up here again.
Can you explain a little more in depth what is biometric information?
So it's unique identifiers, whether it's through photo identification or fingerprint or some other unique identifier that clearly only one person can have. And so it gives a much greater confidence that the person submitting that Social Security number or that documentation is in fact the correct person. So it limits identity theft.
So there could be a John Smith, and there could be another John Smith using the first John Smith Social Security number, and now you'll be able to tell that it's not the right John Smith. So
Correct.
even if they submit the right name with the Social Security number, there'd be other. Does that mean all Social Security cards are going to be reissued at some point with this kind of?
Theoretically, people would have biometric and like I forget the term of art they use in the bill, but basically Social Security cards that are you can't destroy and they hold up over time and they have biometric data in them. So yes, ultimately. I think the one pocket of people that they had concerns about are just those American citizens who don't have passports. But as more people get passports, that solves for it. And they also link to, the bill calls them to link to state DMV records, which also provide biometric unique photo identifications. So, so I don't want to get off on that point, but as people ask, how do we make sure we don't end up in the same place again? These are unique things in this bill that previous versions of immigration reform never addressed. So that notion that we have at our border a sign that says stay out and another sign that says help wanted, we're making sure that we're sending the right signals to reduce that kind of underground workforce. So that's the E-Verify was the second component. The third component is how do we make sure we have a legal immigration system that's effective and timely, right? Many of you have probably heard horror stories about poor families who have been trying to bring a loved one into the country or immigrate into the country by following all the right rules, and it can take anywhere between 10, 15, and we've heard some cases of 20 years that they've been waiting to get into the country. That doesn't provide much incentive for people to play by the rules if the rules just don't seem to be working for people. And so the next component of this bill is to clear the backlog, the current backlog in legal immigration requests, and that we get through that, and that we streamline our current legal immigration system to better address future flow. Previous versions of the bill didn't do that as effectively. Finally, we need a guest worker program that meets the needs of our communities and our economies. And we see this across the tourism industry and across the West Slope in terms of our ranchers and farmers and other business leaders, that they currently don't have a guest worker program that helps them meet their needs. And so this bill also addresses that in a couple ways. It streamlines our ag guest worker program. Many of you have probably heard many complain over the years about the H-2A program. It creates a new 3-year portable visa for ag workers. It also incents ag workers to stay in ag. If they stay in ag and help protect our food chain in this country, and they're working in ag and they can demonstrate they have been working in ag over the last 5 years and that they will continue to do so for a certain number of years, it fast tracks their path to citizenship should they choose to pursue a path to citizenship. And that's an important piece to maintain that security we have over our food industry, our production. So the guest worker program. In terms of the tourism industry, it creates a new W visa that is also a 3-year portable visa. Again, allowing businesses and industry folks who typically had to jump through hoops every 10 months to reapply for a visa, they now have the confidence that people who come into this country on that guest worker W visa are actually qualified for 3 years. They have to work for registered employers, so they can't just go work for anyone. Employers would still have to secure and register that they are a registered employer to participate in this guest worker program. But you can imagine if you're an employer having the confidence that you know this very unique person that you've invested real time and energy into developing, that you can work with them over the course of 3 years with the ability to renew without that person having to go back to their country of origin. So they can renew once, so a total of 6 years in the country as a guest worker, with the ability to come and go in and out of the country freely. So that's the guest worker program. And I think it's with all of those components pulled together that it starts to give people a greater sense that we're not going to end up in the same place 10, 15, 20 years from now. Now, some of you may have questions about what does it do for the 11 million people currently living in the shadows, and how do we address the path to citizenship. The path to citizenship would be a 10-year path, an earned and rigorous path. There are fines and penalties that would have to be applied. They have to clear background checks, rigorous background checks. They have to pay their taxes. They can't move to citizenship or adjust to legal permanent resident or citizenship until the many other people who have actually played by the rules and have been going through the legal system of immigration until that backlog has been addressed. So it answers that question about, gosh, it seems so unfair that these folks can jump the line. Well, this bill actually maintains that line, addresses that backlog as quickly as possible, and then moves people in a timely manner and over the 10 years to a path to citizenship. Before anyone could start that path to citizenship, there are also several triggers to make sure that we as a country are doing everything we can to secure our borders. So maintaining and creating fences and the technology, additional personnel, all the things that we need as a country to have greater confidence that we're actually addressing the border issue from the get-go. So that's a very quick overall summary of the bill and the timeline about what's going to play out in the next week in the Senate and then hopefully next month in the House. And I'm happy to take any questions any of you may have.
Michael?
When you say the border, what border do you mean?
Well, any border at some level, because when you think about the entry-exit system, that piece applies to all ports of entry in our country, so airports and seaports, so all of our borders. Many of the border provisions in terms of technology and personnel, I will acknowledge, are along the southern border. There are 11 sectors along the southern border. Most of those are performing well over 90% of effectiveness rate, meaning that they feel like very few people are actually sneaking in through the border in those areas. There are 3 sectors that are well below that 90%, and that really is the main focus of where everyone acknowledges they could be doing more and different work to better secure that border. So the long answer, I guess, is the whole country.
I just worry that if we focus on our southern border, the northern border will essentially supplement supplant the southern border. So why wouldn't you do both borders at the same time?
Well, I think they are. I mean, I can go back and look at the and ask our lead policy person who knows the bill far better than I do what the breakdown is of some of those personnel breakdowns, and Noah and I can get back to you on that. But I would say it does address both borders, especially through the effort on the exit-entry systems and having that technology, which we've just never had before. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, I must say that I've gone from the northern border into our country totally unchecked.
Okay.
I haven't had that luxury of that experience. That's interesting. But on the, at least what I've been watching with the news, the Senate compromise that's come about has been driven by the idea that you secure the borders first and then you go to the legalization process. And I know Senator Bennett is part of the Gang of Eight, was working on drafting the original bill, but he was also involved in earlier in terms of balancing the budget. And I think the numbers that I heard in terms of the proposal for not only securing the border, but additional border patrol and the fencing is something like $32 billion, if that number was correct.
So thank you for bringing that up again, because I meant to mention that in my opening remarks and I forgot. My joke about deficit reduction, overall, just so people have a perspective on this, the CBO came out with their score finally. When I was up here last talking to some folks in Aspen, we did not have the CBO score yet. They predict anywhere between $175 billion in deficit reduction over a 10-year period and almost $1.1 trillion over 20 years. So there are significant efforts in here to ultimately reduce our deficit. There are several, I mean, there's billions of dollars going to the border, absolutely. And that goes towards fencing, it goes toward technology, it goes for personnel. And as we talk to rooms of people across the state, and I'm sure other representatives who are talking around the country probably get a lot of feedback about where else people would like to see those dollars, and I appreciate that. I think it's an important facet of this bill that because it does secure the border, because we do address legal immigration, because we do address the guest worker, and because we create a fair but earned path to citizenship, because it attempts to do all of those things, it's the first time that people feel confident that we're going to be able to get a bill through. Just to point out, too, on the stakeholders that helped put this bill together, Senator Bennett was clearly one of the members of the Group of Eight. He often jokes around when they call them the Gang of Eight that they're the sorriest looking gang anyone's ever seen. But he's one of the members of the Group of Eight. And as he's described the process, his point has been, it's been a really rewarding process where it hasn't been about the politics of outmaneuvering the other side. It's really that they've come together to address these obvious problems, right? We don't have to convince anyone in the state that our current immigration system is broken. No one needs convincing of that. Everyone has acknowledged they might have different facets that they care more about fixing, but everyone acknowledges it's broken. And that stakeholder coalition means that for the first time ever, this group and this bill has earned the support, spent through months and months of stakeholder meetings and negotiations and this really collaborative, as Michael calls it, apolitical approach between the 8 members. It's through that long process that they've created a bill that has the support of the Chamber of Commerce, but also with the AFL-CIO. It has the first time ever do we have the ag growers and producers from the major stakeholders around the country in ag at the table supporting this bill, in addition to the farm workers. So it's been this very fragile coalition, and I think it's because it addresses all those points that we were able, and hopefully are able, to get this bill out of the Senate with, hopefully a 70-vote victory on it. We still have a lot of work to do on the House side.
Other questions? Rachel?
Well, I really would like to thank you for the presentation today and thank the Senator for his hard work. I know these things are very difficult, and it's always the issues that you have questions about that you raise as opposed to just the good points. And so I guess to start, I'd like to say I think it's incredibly important to see the portability of those work visas. That has been an issue I've heard raised with Club 20 and any number of other groups, and we certainly have all seen the stories of folks being exploited. They're brought over, they think there's one type of job, the foreman takes their passport, next thing you know they're owed 6 months worth of wages, and if they leave, their visa is revoked, and so they cannot participate in the competitiveness of a market to ensure that they're well treated. And so that's a very important element. But I am a little concerned about, at what point does this start to suppress wages for other workers? And, over the years, seeing ads run for, front desk personnel and other resorts, and, you run the ad for 8 weeks and you prove that you didn't have anyone willing to take the job for $11.50, and then suddenly you can bring in other workers. And in the resort communities, it has a lot more to do, I think, with the cost of housing, and that you can't live on $11.50 an hour. And at what point does this just start to really undermine the locals who maybe finally have gotten up to $14 an hour, and somebody says, well, look, I can hire all these new workers now for 10, so don't expect a raise for the next 3 years. And how does that work? Because we have some of our biggest challenges with the needs of the moderate to low income residents. And I certainly could see this leading to, say, an increase, legitimate increase, in the requests for food stamps and SNAP and nutritional assistance from the counties. Now these folks are legal and they'll be able to apply for these sort of benefits. what, and we're seeing SNAP get cut back so
let me try to
radically right
tackle
now.
some of those
Yeah,
questions
yeah.
one at a time. So a couple points. For the 11 million people who are here in this country who can come out of the shadows if they pass their background check and so on and pay the penalties and fines, what they're applying for that 10-year path is called RPI status, Registered Provisional Immigrant. During RPI status, they may not receive any federally mandated benefits, so like healthcare and other stuff. So that is one point I wanted to point out for your question.
And what was the P in that registered?
Registered Provisional Immigrant. Okay, the next question is, what does this do about jobs and wages? Well, one of the points that many people will make is the best thing we can do in our country to increase wages and secure jobs is to eliminate the underground market, right? That is probably doing more to depress wages than anything else. And so if people are forced to, if people can come out of the shadows and people are now forced to use an E-Verify system, you're putting all of the work above board. And so often we hear stories about people being able to outbid another employer who might be playing by all the rules and another employer isn't, and therefore they can underbid because they're not using an authorized workforce. Those are all real concerns. And so in that regard, one argument is merely taking people out of the shadows and putting them into work authorization does a huge benefit to increase wages across the board. Next, and this is one where I'm very conscious of not talking out of both sides of my mouth, but there's good parts and bad parts, and it depends on who you are, so I'll try to talk through it on the pros and cons from different perspectives. For the guest worker programs that are meant to fill very specific needs, whether they're seasonal or it's a workforce that you just can't hire locally for whatever reason, and therefore you really need to hire through a guest worker program, just lost my train of thought. What was I?
I'm not sure where
Oh
you
my
were
God,
going.
I totally
I'm
just
sorry.
lost my train of thought. Anyway, your question was...
We're still a little bit on wages, I think.
Yeah, so
and
the
workforce.
wages, so, the caps, that's where I was going, sorry, I completely lost my train of thought. So, there are, for all the various guest worker programs, there are various caps. So, on ag, where right now many people don't use the H-2A visa because they would argue it's so dysfunctional, it doesn't meet their needs, so it doesn't matter if there's a cap or not because no one's using it. There will be a cap on the new ag visas, but it's substantially high because we want to make sure that we can maintain our workforce. And there's lots of incentives to keep people who have been working in ag to continue to working in ag. However, when it comes to the construction trades, and this is, people feel different. There are different viewpoints on this. The cap is actually much lower, and that's a national cap. And so that's a place where I think many people would argue that there have been workers, American citizens, sitting on the bench, unemployed, right? And so that's a place where they have the cap much lower. Now, for businesses in certain industries who do construction in places and regions that are hard to attract workers to, that's a scary thing to have the cap lower. At the same time, the cap was meant to be low enough that it helped put American citizens back to work in an industry where there's a strong sense where there was Americans who are able to perform those jobs and tasks. So I think they've tried to adjust. There's some recognition around the caps that they were trying to meet the needs of our workforce through the portability and the flexibility, and that's something to point out, that when you first look at some of these caps and you balk at how low they are, remember, however, that these are now, in many cases, 3-year visas, so they're going to be cumulative, right, because their visa lasts more than 1 year. So I know I'm not exactly answering your question, but I do think there was a concerted effort to address some of those concerns and fears.
Yeah, sure. No, it seems, and I had thought about the other side of that equation as well. I just wanted to hear how you would present it. Are there increased employer penalties for no long, if you're still skirting the system if this bill passes?
So there are definitely penalties if you're, if you're blatantly and obviously hiring people under the table. I think the hope is that when the E-Verify system with biometric data is in place, it actually is very helpful for employers. Mm-hmm. Because right now what we so often hear from employers is, gosh, we're taking a beating on both sides, right? If we challenge someone's paperwork and it turns out to be accurate paperwork, then we get in trouble with the Department of Labor. If we accept someone's paperwork as matter of fact, and it turns out they were not here legally and that's not the right paperwork, then we as the employer get penalized with fines and fees. So they feel like they're in a no-win situation in the first line of law enforcement, and they went out of that business. They got into whatever job they're in to run their business and produce their livelihood, and they wanted out of that. Being able to do E-Verify as an employer allows you to run it with confidence that said person is in fact said person. You'll get an answer back on whether or not they're at work authorized, and then you can move forward. If there are like inadvertent errors or other issues that come up, there's very little, like they've tried to create some grace room in there for employers that if they're playing by the rules and doing all what they should be doing, there's not these huge penalties and fines. If there's deliberate and consistent breach of that, then in fact the penalties and fines are substantial. I don't remember what they all are off the top of my head, so I'm hoping you don't ask me.
Rob? So on the E-Verify, this bill mandates E-Verify for all employers?
It phases E-Verify in over the course of 5 years. So employers that are over 5,000 employees would go in, I believe, year 2. The next threshold is at year 3. It's employers over 500, and then finally it's employers under 500 and ag workers. And the hope is that employers with over 5,000 people have robust HR departments and other stuff, and they can more readily move forward with it. It allows some people, not as many people are currently using E-Verify. Many people who do federal contracts and others are already using it and speak highly of it, and they're not worried about the transition. But it also lets the agencies make sure that they can carry the load and burden of having every employer do it. So they're phasing that in over a 5-year period.
And logistically, how is the biometric piece going to work? Are businesses going to have a fingerprint reader? Or
I don't know, and I don't. So just in terms of the timeline, if the bill passes the House and Senate and then is enacted into law after the president's signature, there'll be a 1-year period where the Department of Homeland Security will promulgate the rules. Also in the bill, the Department of Homeland Security is tasked with the responsibility of putting together a biometric system that we all have confidence in and that will work. So the implementation of that system, we don't yet have the detail on.
And then another question unrelated to the E-Verify. Have there been studies on this bill on inflationary impacts?
Inflationary impacts.
Because I think one of the big concerns is that, this raises contrary to what you said, it raises the price of wages by simple supply and demand. It takes workforce out, even though they're illegal workforce, they're still, from the countrywide point of view, they're part of the workforce right now. So in supply and demand, you take that workforce out, it raises the price of that commodity, therefore cost to business, the business gets a higher expense, so they pass it on to their customers, i.e. an inflationary.
Yeah, but there's lots of different ways
relation.
one could look at that. And I mean, if you think about employers who carry huge legal burdens and other burdens because they are worried about their court cases and everything else from carrying people that they didn't realize were undocumented or inappropriately documented, and then they face fines and penalties and they're lawyered up for all those reasons. There's all the other hidden costs that are associated with it. Right now, to use E-Verify, you literally type the person's name into a computer onto a website and it checks it. It's not very cumbersome. Down the road, is there some type of mechanism that people would have to use? The answer is yes. The hope is that it's done at a very reasonable cost, or that there's some type of that's provided in a way that doesn't become overly burdensome to especially our small businesses up and down Main Street. So I think if there's anything about this bill that I would say is that the 8 members who crafted it, I think it's why you see such huge numbers in deficit reduction, is because they are very conscious of the economics of the bill, and they were very committed to making sure that long-term we're helping our economy and not hindering the economy from growing and expanding. I know that doesn't exactly answer the question.
I understand that that's what I explained. Supply and demand is a very rudimentary element of this, stay out, help wanted sign, as you put it, at our borders. And that's why I asked specifically if there was a inflationary study based on the bill, as there often are on economic-based bills
Yep.
that this
I-
is.
my guess
that
is the
weigh in
CBA.
all the factors, not just the one factor, but my understanding is that's one of the holdups of getting 80 votes in the Senate versus 70
We
votes.
can go back and look at what other data they have. There's been actually a couple other economic reports that talk about how this bill can help grow GDP, and I honestly just don't remember all the numbers off the top of my head, but that actually has been done, and unfortunately I don't have it at hand. I thought I had a sheet here that had some of that, but I don't think I do. Just on some other points that I think people will also care about, there's there's a lot in this bill to address future investment in this country. So the INVEST Act, so foreign entrepreneurs, I mean, there's a strong belief that, right, we've lost economic growth in our own country and job creation because we've made it so difficult for entrepreneurs to get a visa to come into our country. Or, for instance, we spend a lot of time educating in our graduate schools engineers and scientists only to send them back to their countries of origin upon graduation, and then we spend the next 20 years competing with intellectual property that we frankly trained them on. So this bill makes an attempt to basically staple a visa to STEM graduates in our graduate schools. In terms of the INVEST visa, entrepreneurs who seek to come to the U.S. to start their own companies can qualify for a 3-year visa that would be available to immigrant entrepreneurs who have a qualifying investor in the U.S. and can demonstrate certain benchmarks related to job creation. Again, doing everything we can to have real job creation in this country. And places like Aspen and other resort communities in towns like this, I think, really have the ability to attract some types of these really innovative entrepreneurs who, frankly, can work from anywhere. And so there's hope that that will help our economies across the state and country as well.
So what are some of the issues or concerns that the House is raising in regards to the bill? And then the second part of that question is, have you been working with Congressman Tipton's staff to get a sense in terms of where he may be going in terms of support or not support?
Okay, so on the first question about, what's happening in the House, to be really honest, I don't know. I don't want to put words in people's mouths. Generally, I think there's a sense that many members have a real concern around the path to citizenship, that I think there is a much stronger emphasis on guaranteeing certain triggers and results before we even consider a path to citizenship. I think there was some talk about breaking the bill, like, can't we just address our ag guest worker issue? Or can't we just solve for our high-tech industry issue? And I think the thought is, if we don't address this comprehensively, you just won't get the smaller pieces through. So there's been some talk about kind of breaking it onto its component parts. In terms of working with the rest of the delegation, when Michael started really focusing on immigration 2 or 3 years ago, it was frankly at the result as he traveled from town hall to town hall. So often he'd come, finish the town hall, and people would come up to him at the very end and kind of pull on his sleeve and say, Michael, you got to do something about immigration. I didn't want to bring it up in the big room because I didn't want to, it's such a crazy issue. I didn't want to bring it up, but you got to solve for it. And time again, that was happening. And he tasked the staff, and we've spent a considerable amount of time creating the Colorado Compact. And that was something that we invited the entire delegation to participate in. And really what we set out to do in the state is to create a broad consensus about what are the principles that we should see in an immigration bill. And we are proud to say that, hundreds, I think now the list is up well over 500, but initially we launched with hundreds and hundreds of groups supporting 5 to 6 broad principles around what immigration reform should look like. In fact, Club 20 was the first group to support that compact, and that was instrumental in moving ag leaders and other very right-of-center advocates who came forward and said, the system's so broken and we need to fix it. And I think through that process, we invited the whole delegation to participate in it, and I think what Michael would report back to all those people who helped out through that Colorado Compact, that this bill really does reflect the broad principles and holds very true to it. I think the only change is that compact called for a sensible path forward for the 11 million people. I forget what it was, a common sense path forward. And this bill provides a path, an ultimate path to citizenship, an earned and rigorous path, but an earned path to citizenship. But I think overall it's a very, the bill is very consistent to the work that we set out to do with the whole delegation and with stakeholders and advocates around the state.
Other questions or comments? Steve?
I'm wondering about what the effect would be on the labor force in Aspen. Because we do, right now, we get a lot of Brazilians, a lot of Argentinians, a lot of probably Australians and New Zealanders coming to work in the ski industry. I personally always wondered, well, why aren't college students from the United States filling these jobs like they traditionally did? But then I'm just wondering, like, what the numbers will be for in the guest worker program. Will we still be getting kind of the same number of young foreign people coming to work in the ski industry, or is it, do you think it will change the dynamic of that?
There's a couple things. One, I think the W visa is meant to help meet the seasonal needs of companies, whether that's the tourism industry or other companies who really have those kind of seasonal fluctuations. And that W visa with the portability and the 3-year to ultimately 6-year renewal, I think should help address that. So the likelihood is, yes, I think for those companies that rely on that seasonal help, that visa is meant to help meet their needs. In terms of, there is a component in the bill that we worked with Ski Country that was meant to, there are many foreign travelers and vacationers who choose to vacation in Aspen or Vail or other mountain regions across Colorado because of the expert ski instructor industry that the ski instructor that we have. And they're really looking for people who also speak their native language. And I think that's a place where that very unique need of both being an incredibly qualified ski instructor but also having the language skills necessary to work with this clientele is really important. And the bill does allow for that type of visa to be secured and safeguarded. And I know if you talk to any of the ski industry folks, they will say that that has been incredibly problematic over the last many years, and they frankly stopped using certain guest worker programs because it wasn't working for them. The reason I mention that is bringing in what we're told, I don't have all the numbers at my fingertips, but that type of client to places like Aspen is like one of the faster growing pieces of their market. And when they come and spend 2 weeks in one of your resorts, they're eating dinner every night in your restaurants, and they're shopping in the boutiques, and they're creating huge economic boom to the local industry in a way that that it really has a multiplying effect. And so the bill does in fact address and create an opportunity for that very specific niche to be safeguarded. And I think that was something important to many of our mountain communities. And we work directly with Ski Country to get that done.
Just a kind of small follow-up on that, because the portability is an important and new element. So will a company still have to sponsor first, and then when they get here they can continue to work for that company, or they could leave that company and work for someone else within the same industry? Does there still have to be a sponsor process? Because that seemed to be one of the hang-ups before, where people would say, well, wait a second, I have to pay $1,200 to, random number, to prepare this application, submit the application, bring the guy over, and then now he leaves me after a month.
So previously, if they were leaving, they were breaking the visa, the contract or the visa. So that portability didn't really exist before. It
Correct.
does now, and that's a concern. However, theoretically, the process has been streamlined. So whereas companies used to have to go through a very rigorous certification process, many of you have probably heard many an employer raise concerns about that process. They now would go through a attestation process which basically says they attest that they tried to hire an American worker and were unable to, and that they registered the job, and that they're a registered bona fide employer. So they would then, before a guest worker could come into the country, they have to have an employer willing to take them before they can enter. They have then that 3-year visa, and that 3-year visa could then be portable to other employers who are registered employers. Now, I know this isn't as relevant perhaps to some of the questions we're dealing with today. However, I want to point this out because it matters so much to our ag folks across the state. The ag visa provides portability within the agriculture sector. A big concern many of our ag growers and producers have is that sometimes people come into the country on an ag visa, but then would much rather go off and work on roads and roofs or oil rigs or other places. So that the portability within ag, the portability on the ag visa is within registered ag employers. The portability on the W visas for, I hate to use this phrase, but often people call it low skilled. I'm going to call it service employees. So think about restaurant workers and people who are cleaning rooms in hotels and so on. That those are 3-year visas, and they provide portability among registered employers who go through some initial process, but it's intended to be much less cumbersome than the existing process.
And I'm sorry, can you go into a little more detail about registered? What does registered mean?
So they have to demonstrate, they have to register with the Department of Homeland Security that they are a bona fide employer, and that there are certain criteria. Again, going back to your point about how do we make sure we're not undermining our own economy and our own job creation. So, for instance, you can't lay off all your employees and then, like 2 days later, apply for a bunch of guest workers. Right? Like, there are certain things that you have to now attest to, that you didn't just lay off your old workforce and you're bringing in guest workers for a lesser rate. There's a series of criteria like that. You can't have it be in the middle of a strike, which I don't know, it probably hasn't happened here in a long time, but you can't be in the middle of a strike and then as a result bring in a whole series of guest workers. That's not the intent of the guest worker program. The guest worker program is meant to meet these very specific and seasonal needs of employers who can't hire local from a local employment base.
So
it's not meant to undermine our local employment base.
Is this something you'd register in advance or register when there's a need?
You register in advance, and in ag they would, I think, release they would do it quarterly. So for folks who don't realize they have a need until later in the year, all the visas aren't used up in the beginning of the year, right? So they kind of do these allotments over the course of the year, and I believe a quarterly basis, so that employers aren't blocked out if they don't realize they have a need till later.
Because in a seasonal environment, a tourist environment, you don't
Correct.
know about the need until the need is upon you, and registration, I don't know what the process is. It's a 4-month process to
Correct.
register, and then the need's over because the season's over.
But if you think about it, many of our employers who have been using the guest worker program, they don't know the exact needs, but they know their general needs. They know the general jobs that they would be hiring for, and they know their general numbers that what they would be hiring for. And they would register that at the beginning of the year maybe, and say these are our anticipated needs. It doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily hire all those people.
Sure.
This is the difference about portability, whereas you used to bring a very specific person over on a specific visa, you're now registering as an employer. There will be a population of registered guest workers, and there'll be much more flow. But yes, you'd have to anticipate well enough in advance, but I think many of those businesses already have that knowledge. The problem
I'm in a
is...
restaurant.
Okay.
I'm in a tourist town in Aspen, and we don't know until the season kind of hits us where our staff levels are, where businesses can be, where the snow is,
Yep.
blah, blah, blah. Ski-Co's a different story. They clearly probably would register for this sort of thing. And so, and we know that America is made up of primarily small businesses. That's where our economic driver is.
Absolutely.
So how do we make this easy for small businesses is the question. You're right, the big ag companies, the Ski-Co's, the hotel that has 300 employees, they've got HR departments. And again, like the E-Verify, having it start with the 5,000 employee company and work its way down. But I think one of the struggles is going to be how do you get the small business owners capable of taking advantages of things that the larger businesses are taking advantage of. If I'm not registered for
So
this type of worker and there's people shifting around in this field.
It's a very good point, and like I said, I think moving from the complicated, cumbersome process of certification to moving to a process of attestation is meant to actually make this a much more streamlined and effective process. It's meant to take a lot less time and a lot less money to get through. And one can imagine that if you can register as an employer for a 3-year cycle, that maybe there really is, if that might be then well worth it, right? Because then as you have needs over the course of various seasons, that you can then tap into that guest worker program. We don't yet know. There's some of the details of the bill that I will be honest, I don't know every detail of the bill, but a big portion of the nitty-gritty details in terms of the fees associated with registering and so on has not been decided yet. That's through the rulemaking process. So if the bill gets passed, there'll be a year where they now craft all the nitty-gritty rules and regulations. And I think there is there's a concerted effort to make it usable and much more flexible and user-friendly to our businesses in order to meet the needs of our economy. So we can take those points back, and we can also go back and make sure that I'm not missing obvious stuff that's in the bill that I should know and I don't know that addresses your point, as we will do on the inflation question as well. But I do think that's the intent.
So, Sarah, if people are interested in either finding out more information about the bill or sending comments on to Senator Bennett or other in our congressional delegation, what should the public be doing if they're interested?
So a couple different things. If you have questions about what's in the bill and people want to learn more about what's in the bill, we have a bunch of information on our website that provides information and copies of the bill and updates. They're also, depending on your various specific area of interest, many of the broader associations and organizations nationally have some really great information on their websites as well. So, for instance, if you're a Farm Bureau member, they have a lot of information on their website. If you're a small business owner, the National Association has much information on their website. So that's another way to access very specific information relevant to your immediate needs. If you're interested in actually helping with passage and moving the bill forward, because we all acknowledge the system's broken and this is a bipartisan attempt to fix it in a serious way, and we think it craftfully and artfully does so, then the question is, well, what can people be doing to help secure passage? And I think in that point, it's likely to, it's almost definitely coming up for a vote either Thursday night or Friday morning in the Senate, and I'm fairly confident that it's not an issue for either of the Senate offices. I don't want to speak for the other office, but based on everything I know, I have no reason to believe that they are not supporting it. I just don't feel like I'm empowered to say that, but I have every reason to believe they will be supporting it. So I don't think there's a lot of phone calls and letter writing that anyone needs to do for our offices. I do think that many of our House members have not said in public how they're going to proceed with their vote, and we respect the fact that they haven't had their own process in the House. They need to have a bill that they debate through committee and through the floor process, and so they'll be doing that over the next month, and we very much respect that they need to go through that process, and during that process we hope and encourage that stakeholders around the state will continue to emphasize the need to really address this, that kicking it down the field like we do so often in D.C., which, trust me, is not anything Michael Bennett is proud of or appreciates or wants to participate in, but that notion of kind of just letting it slide and kicking the can down the field again is just not an option on this one. And we hope that people will continue to say that. It was one of the key points in the Colorado Compact that so many of our communities supported, which was saying it's a federal issue, and hey, guys, roll up your sleeves, get this done, fix it, because anything short of that's unacceptable to your communities back home. And I think kind of keeping that same level of accountability on our whole delegation is an important thing for communities to do if we want Washington to work. there is big hope. I know all of us have been really frustrated, even those of us who work in these offices. There's nothing more frustrating than spending your time watching bills not move forward, right? And the level of dysfunction that's happening in Washington, and Michael's not pleased with that either. And there is a strong belief that if we can get immigration passed, and as Michael often says, demonstrate that they can actually do something real and hard, if we can get over this hump, there's real hope that we can then move on and tackle other really important issues in this bipartisan manner, whether that's debt and deficit or more job creation or how to look at our growing energy economy and so on. There's so much other work that we need to address. There's a real desire to create the accountability to get our members to vote on this and pass something that's reasonable and addresses the core problem.
All right, thank you. Maybe we could shift gears for a few minutes and look to some of our local issues. And I know Noah has been intricately involved in the Thompson Divide issue and been keeping the senator abreast in terms of what's going on. And what's the status of the senators in terms of his proposed bill and the timing on that? And that bill again is to protect the Thompson Divide area from future oil and gas leasing on public lands, recognizing the unique nature of that area and all the environmental impacts that oil and gas would have on not only the environment but also on the economy.
Yeah, so as of course you know, we introduced the bill in late March this year, or I'm sorry, yeah, it was in late March this year. And currently, that's the action that's been taken on it. It's there. That said, there's been a lot of conversation going on from that that we're using to try and reach a point where that bill is going to be viable going forward, right? So, one of the things that, in fact, I think a lot of you were at the barbecue that the coalition offered to throw Michael when he was here in early May, which was great. And actually, I'm not sure he said this specifically in his speech there, but we had just walked out of about 3 hours of meetings with leaseholders in the area. So, the idea is we introduced the bill because Michael heard overwhelmingly from communities that this was something they wanted to protect the area, and that this bill was the way to do it. Now that that's out there, we're also trying to work with some of the leaseholders in the area to make sure that this is something that can move forward without getting tied up in either years of litigation or, as I think folks are concerned about now with some of the BLM revelations that have come out, years of NEPA process and agency processes. Because I think neither of those is going to be an economic support to the community. We're looking for a path to certainty that can have a smoother path forward than either of those options. So.
Okay, any questions?
Well, I'm just a little confused by what you meant with the years of NEPA process.
Oh.
At a certain level, we really appreciate NEPA.
Oh, sure,
because
certainly.
it's going to really point out the environmental damages and issues.
Yep.
And so you're not talking about streamlining that for those current leaseholders in any way?
No. What I'm talking about is recently there was that article in I think it was the Aspen Daily about the Thompson Divide leases getting rolled in with something like 63 others in the White River National Forest that had insufficient NEPA done on them. And I know there's some concerns with folks about how long that process is going to take and how it might hold up progress, otherwise progress in the Thompson Divide. So that's specifically what I'm referring to.
Okay.
And honestly, there's a lot of work being done in the BLM right now that we're keeping track of as best we can to figure out how they're going to proceed, what they're going to do with that suspension, the hour that they, or the year that they bought in the suspension, and that kind of thing. And as we're working to figure out exactly what their process is going forward, we're also optimistic that some of the conversations happening between local stakeholders and leaseholders are going to find a smoother path on this. Does that answer your question?
That answers
Okay.
the question. Okay, thank you.
Other questions on that topic? Anything else we want to present?
Yeah, George, we actually have a memo of interest from our airport, which is a letter we're about to send to Senator Bennett's and other representatives' office with the board's approval. I wonder if we might move that up to talk about if you're interested in hearing the discussion on that. It's regarding the TSA and a change that they're making.
Yeah, well, I wanted to first thank you for coming today and sharing this information with us and also with the public at large, because it's being done by grassroots, so you'll reach a much broader audience than just the 5 of us. So thank you. It's been very informative, and we really appreciate having the opportunity to have a discussion exchange with you.
Thank you for having us, truly.
So I'll let you guys off the hot seats if you just want to sit on the sidelines and listen to this next conversation. As John said, we're looking at a draft letter to send off to your boss as well as to our congressional delegates as well in regards to some latest information in terms of the TSA's request for local funding. So we'll move into an MOI on that. And Jim Elwood, he was here, or Brian,
Stepped out, I can.
you want to come up and present this? And just introduce yourselves, please, for the record.
I'm Dave Sangillo. I work at the airport. I'm the airport security coordinator.
And Brian Griefey, Assistant Director of Aviation for Administration. Brought Dave along as being the airport security coordinator, is responsible for the day-to-day communications with TSA, really in some days hour-to-hour communications, because they have became a significant player in our day-to-day operations. So he helped in the development of this letter. The letter in the packet for your consideration is in response to an airport security program amendment based on the fiscal year 2014 budget to eliminate exit lane staffing by TSA personnel. The underlying concern with this policy is there is no generally accepted alternative for exit lane staffing other than airport staff. I will mention that right now we have an exit lane preventer that's
I
supplemented
really would
with-
love to know the definition of exit lane before we go too much further in this.
That's a good question.
Thank you.
I can probably clarify that. We
Okay.
use it every day, and I
I know.
forget that it isn't really common knowledge.
And just to be clear, you said to eliminate exit lane?
To limit exit lane staffing by TSA personnel.
Okay.
So the exit lane is when you get off the plane, specifically in Aspen, come off the ramp, and there is basically a corridor that you pass through. If you go backward through it, you've probably heard an alarm go off. And every airport has some sort of corridor. It could be, just the width of a hall or the width of a wall. Could be a hallway, but it is that definite transition from secured area, which is the highest regulated, federally regulated secure area, to the public area.
Okay.
And the focus on that is public area. Anybody is open to come. You can go there. There's no restrictions on it. Secured area has a lot of restrictions, and everybody knows that as they've traveled. Can't have liquids, etc. At several airports throughout the country, that is staffed by TSA personnel. I will mention right now it is not at Aspen, and that's important to keep that in mind. We're recommending sending this letter really as a national look at the industry. It does affect other airports, but it does potentially have an impact on the Aspen Airport if and when we decide to proceed with a new terminal. What that exit lane, what that secure area will look like, we don't know yet, but we would like to have our options open. And TSA personnel are specifically trained in, for instance, behavior detection. They've got set in stone procedures, and they're really the best people to control that secured area, which is the most highly regulated, highly secured area within an airport, which gives access to the national airspace system.
So, Brian, you said that currently the Aspen Pinckney County Airport does not have an exit lane, and so there's really, once you exit the plane, you just move freely. There's no security, whether it's our airport security or TSA.
And I could probably clarify that a little more. We don't have exit lane staffed by TSA, so we do have an exit lane.
Back into the sterile area.
Back into the sterile area.
Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. So we do have an exit lane. It is a slightly unique exit lane in that it goes directly from the plane side into the public area. You'll see going through other airports that the more traditional method of exit lane is get off the plane, you go into the gatehold area where everybody waits to get on their plane, and then there's a transition from that sterile area, gatehold area, to the public area. So Aspen, yes, does have an exit lane, slightly different setup, but I guess my point in that comment was it isn't currently staffed by TSA personnel.
And so, for example, at DIA, are those exit lanes staffed by TSA?
Yes, they are.
And so I don't know if this is proposed legislation, but the proposed legislation is to eliminate the TSA from having a responsibility for manning that exit lane, so they're not responsible fiscally, but to then mandate that onto the individual airports to have to fund that.
That's exactly it, George. It's really an unfunded mandate to have airports supply the security for exit lane staffing.
And the TSA's argument is they don't think it's their responsibility, or they just are trying to save a few dollars like everybody else?
That's probably my best explanation. Is it's a budget consideration without really the thought that we think it deserves in consideration.
And George, it is coming through, I believe, approval of the 2014 budget, so it is couched as a budget issue.
So then is there airport, I'm looking at Jim Elwood, but is there an airport organization, nationwide organization that is working collaboratively in terms of trying to address this issue? Because it's obviously it's much broader than just our airport.
The answer is yes. There's a number of organizations who are working on this issue, have connections to the TSA. The airport trade associations are working on this issue. It is, there are two kind of key components. One is the one that Brian just hit on, which is it's an unfunded federal mandate coming to communities to respond to. Additionally, the TSA is using their security legislative authority by pushing this on airports, by using it and making it part of the airport security plan that each community and airport has to have in place that's approved by the TSA. So they're really using an interesting method in which to transfer this responsibility. And it's problematic, and I think it's one that airports feel strongly about, communities feel strongly about, because if indeed this ends up making the transition, what's right behind that that'll also get transferred to communities as well. So there's a certain amount of anxiety in the industry about what does this kind of mean, the trend lines, and how the TSA is going to conduct themselves moving forward.
But it seems like you would lose you may lose some of the consistency that you have right now across the country with the TSA in terms of what their guidelines are in terms of security versus then turning over to each individual airport security, which may or may not exactly match across the country.
Well, I think your point's really well made there, George, and I think Brian hit on it a few moments ago, which is the TSA agents are trained in behavioral analysis and a certain level of expertise and capacity that really is valuable, and it would not necessarily be easily transferred to the community, however that's responded to with private security or airport staff or airline staff or some other system to protect that transition portal. I think there's great case to be made that the TSA is indeed best suited to accomplish this task, and if it appears to be just a pure budgetary issue, then they need to find a way to work through that subject and not just arbitrarily drop a piece of the security component off on a community without recognizing the impacts.
Yeah, and I'll get to you in a second, Rob, but just as we move into looking at this letter, I don't notice that aspect in the letter in terms of the security TSA has the training versus trying to turn that over to individual airports. I think that's probably something that we should add to this letter.
Really pleased to do that.
Yeah, Rob?
Yeah, I'm curious in terms of just understanding the budgetary implications of this. You know, it seems like robbing Paul to pay Peter here, because, you know, our airport is an enterprise fund, and you keep on saying putting the burden onto the community. It's not like we're going to create an extra tax to create this security. It's going to come out of the airport fund, which is funded by the activities at the airport. So it's not like we're going to add a property tax for this security guard on this exit line. And I don't understand, or I've never been explained how TSA is funded in the first place. So, I mean, I understand the concern of consistency. I think that's a very good point and should be added to this letter. But what I don't understand is the basis of the budgetary impact here, because this is, as John Peacock said, this is coming out of budgetary concern, that they're cutting the TSA budget, so they're finding ways to cut it, and then they're allocating an additional cost onto somebody else, the airport, which is really a federally funded type of operation. I mean, it's an enterprise fund, but it's through the FAA's fees and whatnot that funds a lot of the airport. So it's not really a burden to our community.
No, and I think you're really, especially for those that are watching this discussion, that it's not a shift in general fund activities in Pekin County, and I think that's really a good point. It's not going to, the airport does not use property or sales tax dollars to fund its operation. I would clarify that the FAA helps us with capital improvements at the airport. They do not help us with operating expenses. This would fall under the operating expense portion of the airport fund, which means that we would then have to turn around and put that whatever cost expense that's related to this back onto the tenants, most likely the airlines, since that's the kind of the connection and the directly responsible party. So they would see their fees and charges go up as part of that transition, and that will happen at all airports across country that have to implement this. So the customer ultimately pays the airline, which, you know, there is how closely linked those two pieces are, we could probably talk about for a while, but the simple fact is that someone's going to pick up that fee. Now, the TSA is funded predominantly through a $2.50 tax on every airline ticket that go into a fund to help provide this level of service across the nation. So it is they also get some general fund money on top of that to support their operation, but that fee was put in place post 9/11 when the TSA was stood up as a way to fund those security activities. So there's another funding source that's more or less directed to go toward this this task.
So it sounds like to me, I'm trying to, you know, look at this from a financial side, that the airport operation picks up the added expense, passes that on to the airlines, they raise their airline tickets. Or we try to fight this and the TSA tax goes from $250 to $303 and it raises the airline tickets. So either way, it's raising the airline tickets to provide the amount of funding to provide this service.
Well, I think in theory that's exactly right. In practicality, it's been proposed a number of times to raise that TSA piece of the funding, and that's not been well received in Congress either. So, you know, we have to respect the TSA is caught in a bind as well, and they're trying to make choices about how to make their available funds, you know, work as far as they can, I'm sure. It's just a challenge to communities to have to look at this subject, and that's why we brought it to you, is because I think there's a kind of a broad spectrum component to this discussion. It could impact us at a future time, as Brian mentioned, but it's also, you know, the TSA is probably best suited to accomplish this, and we think that should stay where it currently is.
John?
And Rob, the other thing that I'd add on to your comments is that if it's left to local airports to determine on their own, there's probably going to be a different cost basis depending on the airport, the economies of scale, what have you. There won't be a lot of consistency, whereas if there is going to be an increase through the TSA, at least that would be consistent and there would be a level playing field, so you wouldn't have that. And as a smaller airport, we're less likely to enjoy economies of scale on that front, except that right now, the way we're structured, we don't have any. So we'd be advantaged, but in the future, we may not be. And so it just doesn't, having an unfunded mandate rolled down to the local jurisdictions to deal with creates more opportunities for there to be inconsistency, either in service level, training, or cost, than if it's done through the TSA where it's been appropriately handled.
Rachel?
Yeah, well, I guess I would start by saying I am in support of sending the letter, and the additions that George has suggested to, drive this home is fine. I'm doing some rough math, and if you were staffing that 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., 365 days a year, you're talking about another, 5,800 to 6,000 minimum hours of an employee, and maybe more than that to have double shifts at certain times or whatever. And it concerns me because it whether you call it a symptom of the deficit or a symptom of the sequester or what else, there is a steady transfer of cost to counties that's occurring, or to county airports. The cutbacks on the Meals on Wheels program, the cutbacks, are just starting to really channel their way through as people use up the last of their reserve funds and carryover funds from previous years. And so I think Jim's example, and we should emphasize this as well, is the, if this is transferred, what's next? What is the next thing? They'll say, we're not doing it anymore, but you still have to. And I know whether you're talking Club 20, or Colorado Counties, Inc., or CML, the number one cry has always been no unfunded mandates. Do not give us something that you tell us we have to do, and then in general, our hands are tied in terms of creating the revenue. And it's just an unfortunate passing of the buck off to local communities. So Congress people can go home and say, I never raised taxes, I didn't raise your airline ticket fees. It was those local people who did it. And that's wrong. I mean, we have to take the responsibility at the table here for whenever we don't lower our mill levy or go out and ask the public for more money in a vote or something like that. And it's just wrong for others to be able to say, hey, we're for all low taxes, but by the way, and it's a national trend. Fees are going up everywhere because we are keeping taxes low, so fees go up. And there's a real disadvantage to that, oftentimes in terms of deductibility or stuff. But I just strongly support the letter, and I think that after we finish tackling immigration reform, perhaps we'll tackle some budget reform so that this hiding it and kicking the can down the road. And if these are services that people believe are necessary, they should be incorporated somehow within your airline ticket fee, and they should be paid. And it shouldn't be let's try to push this over to somebody else to charge that fee.
Other questions or comments? Support of the letter going out?
Just two comments. One, I support the letter too, but I do think the biggest issue is the consistency aspect of TSA and their ability to provide the service, specifically with the changes that may come in the next 10 years with our airport, given our new airport master plan. From a logistical comment, I was completely confused by the first sentence, and I just think to me, airport staff is TSA, and I think a layman reading this is going to be confused with exactly what we're saying here. Is TSA doing it? Is airport staff doing it? Are they one and the same? And I mean, I would say TSA has proposed that they no longer provide this service, and that the airports are required to maintain this service on their own, as opposed to what it says now has proposed that airports be required to staff exit lanes. Well, if TSA is doing it, I think it's the airport doing it as a layman, and I understand now that TSA is not airport staff, clearly. But I just think it's a really confusing first sentence and doesn't get the point across.
Michael?
following up on Rob's quibbling with the language, you use the word sterile area. Is that, whose term is that?
That's a federally defined term.
Because to me, sterile means free from pathogens. And so the implication, of course, is that the citizens are somehow contaminated. And I'd rather use really what it's talking about is an unsecured area or a public
Secured,
area.
unsecured.
But sterile is just, I find it offensive, quite frankly. And unable to find that particular definition in the dictionary. That's a new invention. So.
One comment that I would make on that, just for your consideration, and I'm happy to change it, is sterile area is essentially specifically used in the airport security program amendment.
Yeah,
So
I understand, and I'm just saying that it's the use of language by whoever that is not really, I'm not familiar with that use. And when I go into a sterile area, hopefully it's a hospital, and that's what I'm thinking. And I can understand, people want to pollute the language essentially with words that make no sense. So, but that's a personal thing. If you change it, fine. If you don't change it, fine. But I just want to make it clear that using sterile to define some place that is secure is not accurate as far as I'm concerned.
Maybe at least having parens behind the term sterile to say what you mean, something like that.
Steve?
There are two airports I can think of that I've been through, St. Thomas and Pitkin County, where you get off the plane and you walk right into the public area. And it makes the security a whole lot easier. Somebody only has to be manning that when people are getting off the plane and going through the door, and then they're all through the door and the door's locked, and you don't have to have a person standing there guarding it or sitting there like at DIA at the top of the escalators. So I would hope in the new airport we could keep that same system and not mix the deplaning passengers in with the passengers waiting to get on the plane.
That's a great point, and it does have that advantage as you've identified, Steve. When we get further along and decide to do analysis on a new terminal, then we can bring that back. The challenge with it is that when people come into the terminal building and they actually intended to continue on another flight, we either have to intercept them and put them specifically into that secured area, or they go back through security. And with the change in booking technology with Travelocity and Orbitz and all those, we're finding people flying through our airport with it not being the destination that their final destination. So they're flying from San Francisco to us and then getting on an American airplane to go to DFW. And so we have to send people on, the airlines send people on to every flight and say, is there anybody here connecting on to another flight? They separate those individuals and bring them into the secured area separately. So there's a little give and take in there, is all I was clarifying.
Okay. So we'll clean up this letter a little bit, add some notes in terms of the consistency, the importance of that, and bring it back to us.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if it has to really come back to the entire board. If everyone's comfortable with those, we could just do it and I'll sign it and we'll send that off.
That'd be fine with me.
And you guys, I'm looking at Sarah and Noah, I think we normally, when we send letters out to the senator, we always email copies to you. You'd still like to have that?
Yeah, that's a much faster way than mailing it with all the security provisions and other provisions. It will get addressed much more quickly if it just goes, you can send it to Noah and he can get it into the right people's hands.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. And Sarah and Noah, thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
And effort. Thank you.
So George, we were scheduled for a break, but we have two MOIs in open discussion that we could maybe do and take a break before the executive session.
How's the board feeling?
I'd like to at least take 5 minutes. We don't need the full 15. Maybe while they set up. I don't know if there's any setup.
All right, let's just take a short 5-minute break just to get up and stretch.
Okay.
If there's anyone who needs to set up, we could use that time to set up. Okay, we're back, continuing our memos of interest. So we've been skipping around a little bit, so what's next, John?
Yeah, next we have a budget supplemental through Open Space and Trails for the Woody Creek Bridge. I'll turn it over.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so
And you are, for the cameras?
I'm Lindsay Etter. I'm the recreation planner for Open Space and Trails.
And I'm Gary Tenenbaum. I'm Stewardship and Trails Manager.
Yeah, and we're here for the Woody Creek project, the Rio Grande Trail at Woody Creek. As everyone recalls, the planning for this started in 2010. It's a 1,300-foot segment of trail that includes a bridge and a removal of the existing berm that the trail takes over the creek. We received, end of 2010, early 2011, we received a CMAQ grant to help fund this project. It included funds from both the city and the county. So the grant total was $340,000, 281,000 are federal dollars, and we were required to match with 58,000 of local dollars. In the 2011 estimate for construction for this project, that was part of the IGA, we had the project estimated at around $460,000. We just put out our RFP and got our bids back in, and the low bid came in at $540,180, so $540,180. That's about $85,000 over the original estimate. Some of that's due to just increases in construction costs in that time frame, but there were a few things required by CDOT that were not in the original estimate, some of which had to do with migratory bird protection, a few other requirements on environmental, like wastewater management kind of stuff. We're also required for the project to have an engineer supervise construction, and we're in the construction surveying. The estimates for that are around $71,000. It's a do not exceed estimate. So total construction costs for this project, we're looking at around $616,000. We wanted to add in 10% for contingency, just like we do on many of our projects, for all the unforeseen costs associated with construction. So the total estimate right now for this project is $670,838. In the budget, we currently have $82,000. That is some money left over from the original Phase 1 portion of this project, and we've been leaving it in there as a placeholder. So right now, we're looking to add around $588,237 to the project, but keeping in mind $281,486 will be our federal reimbursement on that money. So that's what we're here for today, is the budget supplemental request to move forward on the Woody Creek project.
Okay, questions? Rob, then Michael.
So just to be clear, right now we're allocating $588,000 into this project account, and we will be reimbursed $281. So really, we're kind of, if we were reimbursed now, we're really allocating, was it $300,000?
Correct. A little over that, but yeah.
Will be the effect on the Open Space and Trails Fund.
Right.
Michael?
Why is the project taking so long? I mean, I can sort of remember this 3 years ago.
Right. So we have the money is administered by CDOT. It's federal money, and with that comes a lot of approval processes and requirements. So we've been going through. We worked with the adjacent landowner for a while on a few things, and then we've been moving through the CDOT approval process. I think in particular, because there was a bridge in this project, I think that approval took a while, just because CDOT has a whole department dedicated to bridges, so things have been moving at the speed of CDOT, is what I'll say.
So the difficulty I have with this, of course, is that there are a lot of people in Woody Creek who are not in favor of this bridge, and then we have a cost overrun for whatever reason. How do I get them to support this bridge?
I mean, I guess we worked quite a bit with the community in 2010 about what the bridge would look like and different options for the bridge. We also had a different option in there previously where it was looking at, instead of a bridge option, but widening the trail, and what it required a lot of retaining walls to accomplish that. So we looked at many options and ultimately worked through them, coming out with the bridge being the preferred one, I suppose, would be my answer. I don't know that we will ever get 100% endorsement from everybody on anything, so.
Yeah, too bad, huh?
Yeah.
The CMAQ funds, coincidentally, the next budget supplemental request is using CMAQ funds as well. But it seems like there's probably more efficient and effective ways to use CMAQ funds than perhaps some capital projects if we're having to deal with other agencies that could slow up the whole process, which in turn increases the cost of that project over time. So I guess it may be sort of a comment, but a question. In hindsight, would we have been better off, Open Space and Trails better off just utilizing their own funds and not using CMAQ funds and had just gotten the bridge done and perhaps didn't have to go up to all the specs that CDOT required? Sort of, is there a lesson to be learned from it, I guess?
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically, it's a lesson learned for us. At the time, there was no magic CDOT manual that would have told us it was going to take this much time and this much oversight, and the bridge is going to be rated for an ambulance or a fire truck and all this other stuff. We had no idea at the time when we took it, so we had no warning. Once you get into it and you accept it, it's really kind of hard to just say, oh, no thanks, we're going to do something else. So we learned a very good lesson on this one. We're here where we are now, and we want to get it past this, and we're going to get reimbursement of a significant amount of money. And so the way we're looking at it now is we will definitely look in the future on using federal money for either projects that are less intensive or less structural, and potentially for like a WE-cycle or something, it is easier to get through their bureaucracy, but it's large and it's not easy. And what we've learned too is it changes significantly over time, and it's always something that is different. But yeah, this project had a lot of things that CDOT ended up holding us up on.
Yeah. John?
And George, we've already had we've already started our planning meetings for the 2014 budget of staff, and we've already had this exact discussion about where we're applying these dollars and the lessons learned on this project in particular. So that's on our radar screen for sure.
Rob?
Yeah, and it brings up one of the questions about CMAQ money in general, given the fact that this budget request has to do with it and the next one does too. Much like we do with the core allocation of renewable energy money to grant towards things, we've asked for a let's learn from this process, and have we mitigated, because this is congestion mitigation and air quality, does CMAQ come back to us and say, show us what you've done, and is there any, because I think the problem that we've struggled with the CMAQ money over the last couple of years is, how do we put this to its best use? Sure, we could find things that qualify for it, but what is the best use of the CMAQ money? And maybe internally, to be better than the people that are allocating this, maybe we should look for that when we allocate CMAQ money. A 4-year out study that says this is how much air quality we've mitigated or something like that. Because it's hard to make those decisions up front when somebody says this or that, and then, well, we use the money and maybe it's saving some air quality, maybe it's not, I don't know. Or how much, or what level. Obviously it's doing some, but at what level?
The only thing I'd caution is at a certain point, with the limited amount of CMAQ dollars we get, sometimes the compliance can be more than the benefit. So that's something I think we can certainly talk about with future CMAQ requests. It's kind of hard to fit in with all the other, at a certain point the money becomes almost, is it worth taking in that regard.
And we alternate with those CMAQ funds, only between the county and the city every other year. So
As an
we do have discussions in terms of when this past time go around when we have the CMAQ funds, we brought in Road and Bridge and engineering to see and asked for a list of projects. We went through that list, and we felt at the time that the most effective way to utilize those funds was to fund the recycle program. But we had that discussion, I recall.
And I'm just drawing a blank. Exactly what tax dollar does CMAQ money come from?
It's federal, but Rob, I don't know what the
I mean,
source
is it a
is.
gas tax? Is it a
I don't
energy
know.
tax? Is it a...
I think it comes from gasoline tax, but it is, gasoline, the Highway Users Trust Fund has now been supplemented by federal general funds so much
Yeah.
for a long time. There's probably some mixing there. And the roots of it come from our area being a PM10 non-attainment area a long time ago, which comes from the airport all the way in. So it's both Pickens County and Aspen. And so there's a lot of efforts that have been made to become an attainment area, and that has a lot to do with sweeping, street sweeping. And so many times it's used every other year, every fifth year or something for a replacement of street sweepers, but then the city's responsible for the labor to run that and everything. I think that your concept of making sure it's used most effectively is valuable. I think that similar to John's comment, the dollars can be pretty low, that I wouldn't want to have to spend $60,000 or $70,000 on the study to quantify what would be our best selections in the future, because it is perhaps nibbling around the edges at some way. And you look at what we have done for congestion mitigation with RAFTA and BRT, it's huge. And so, I don't know if in the future some small amenity and augmentation to that program would be something we'd all see fit. But I wouldn't want to just walk away because there's been a delay on this project. It still is, $281,000. It's coming back into this program.
It just gets to my thought process of something that I've struggled with in my 2.5 short years of being in government, which an analogy is the water, use it or lose it. Okay, we're going to take this money, but we've got budgetary constraints across the country. And if we don't use it, we lose it. But, we can't fund our schools, we can't fund our roads, we can't fund this. So where does the tax fund comes from, and is this the best use for these dollars?
Yeah, I totally agree.
And that's kind of
agree.
where my question is germinating as just a philosophy that I want to express to the general public when these issues come up, when we take grant money, that if we don't use it, we lose it and somebody else is, but at some point the economy goes into the tank because we're all spending too much money. It's just the nature of how government works to some aspect.
Well, and if we become a non-attainment area again, we're going to have a tremendous amount of local cost to try to bring that air quality down and maintain our resort viability as a community that has clean air.
Which gets back to how effective it is.
We're going to cut off the philosophical discussion at this point and sort of.
Well, this is part of what our work discussions are
Well,
about.
but we're expanding. You're going beyond the scope of this discussion, I believe, Rob, and I'm running the meeting, so we're going to cut that short. We're going to go back to the approval of this budget, or any other comments or questions on this.
One more little philosophical discussion from my end. I believe I wasn't party to approving this, but I do believe in supporting what the Board of County Commissioners has approved. And I, like Michael, have received lots of complaints from citizens of Woody Creek who did not like the size of this and the appearance of it. I would hope that there used to be a railroad trestle in the same location, and I would hope that the new bridge could look similar to the old railroad trestle that used to be there, which I don't know what it looked like, but just to keep sort of the historical appearance to the project. I, like Rob, think the money could have been spent better elsewhere, but the decision has already been made a couple of years ago, and we need to make the best of the situation now. So a lot of the objections of the local citizens had to do with the appearance of a major concrete kind of looking bridge going across the creek there, And if that could be toned down as much as possible, if that's possible at this point in time, I have no idea what your specifications and blueprints and everything look like for the project.
Yeah, and Steve, I think where we're at this point is we've designed a project. We've actually been working with CDOT. Part of the reason this has taken so long is we've been running that design through CDOT now for the last year, and so to revisit those questions now means we're probably going to be another year or two out. And so what really happened was, because of some of the oversight and design element requirements through the CDOT process, our costs went up, and so we're here asking for a budget supplemental to move the bridge forward as designed, as submitted to CDOT, and as finally approved by CDOT. And I understand the questions coming up. You weren't part of those original discussions, but we did vet using the CMAQ dollars for this purpose and for this bridge, and it wasn't an easy decision or process, but it was made. We came back with a few unexpecteds, and that's why we're really here today in the decision that's in front of you all.
Michael?
Yeah, and I must add some clarification here. There was a series of public meetings about this, and there was controversy about the bridge in general, whether it should be there or not. And there was controversy about the various choices that Open Space and Trails presented to the Woody Creek community. But at least from my point of view, this isn't just about Woody Creek. This is part of a trail system that's 40 miles long. And the idea to allow easy transit on this trail for people who are handicapped or disabled in some way, the bridge made a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense for people who have to suffer going down the S-curves of that bridge. And it presents a hazard to some people. And even the idea of hazard is a controversy. But in the final analysis, the Woody Creek Caucus, through its members, said yes to the design. That it was a lukewarm yes, but it was a yes. And so there are many people in Woody Creek who are not happy with it, and not happy with our budgetary process that we somehow have $500,000 or $600,000 to spend on a bridge, and it's not paved to Lanedo. So they have a hard time understanding the separation of our budget process and how we budget open space and trails, and how we budget our roads, and how we budget our human services. And all I would suggest to them is to participate more in their local government. Their local government is the one government they can really influence. And as witnessed by people talking to you, Steve. But I'm comfortable with this, and I know it's been a great effort on the part of Open Space and Trails. And I'm sorry that we can't please everybody. As was said, we can't always get 100%. So that's just the way it is.
So are we okay with moving this forward? Seeing a nod of heads? Last comment?
Yes, please. Thank you. I just still want to say I have a problem with our format on item 4, the funding summary for all these items, not this program, fully support going forward. But it's very awkward when it says the original budget amount was 82.6. And we know that wasn't the budget amount. The budget amount was this 588 number, and then now we're up to 670. But if there's some way we can change that, because whether that was just a placeholder to start the design work and everything like that, that's one thing. But there was an estimate going into this as to how much we thought it would be, and it was not 82,006. And so this is just something for our management to kind of look at. But always when I'm reading these, I'm like, how could it have gone from that number to the total adjusted number? It just makes us all look worse when we know there was an estimated project number that was not 82.6. So I'll just leave that as a comment. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Okay, you guys are good to go.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We're going to be riding this bridge.
Hopefully by the time the snow falls.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
speaking of CMAQ funds,
More of them.
again, we did have a discussion a year ago or so in terms of the best use of CMAQ funds, and different ideas came up, and we again felt, as a board at that time, that those monies would be best used and more effectively used to launch a WeCycle program that certainly, hopefully, will address less congestion in town and better air quality and more fun. So with that,
Thank you, George. I'm G.R. Fielding. I'm the county engineer for Pickens County. I'm joined today by Mirta. She is the head of the WeCycle program. We have a budget supplemental request today for the WeCycle program. Over the years of planning for the WeCycle program, we had identified in the agenda item summaries to use the air quality mitigation fund that the county has as part of the local match. The local match from Pickens County needs to be 17.21% of the total grant. So if the grant's for $200,000, you multiply that by the 17.21%. That's what we have to come up with. So say that's about $35,000. We had this fund of $24,666, and then WeCycle is going to pay the difference in that to get our full local match allocation. Now that WeCycle has launched, the bill has come due. We submitted the budget supplemental to ensure that we have the funds in place to pay back the city who did the procurement for the project. We are able to go through and answer whatever questions you guys may have about.
I might just add in on GR's. One of the questions that came up last time was this use of the impact funds a new suggestion, or was it something that had come up before? I think that's part of what precipitated us deciding to pull the item and come back. And on December 6th, 2011, where we had asked for guidance moving forward, the budgetary impact from that meeting, if you don't mind, I'll read the paragraph from that AIS in 2011. For 2012, Pickens County CMAQ allocation is in the amount of $200,000, 82.79% of which is federally funded, leaving a county match of $34,420 to access the CMAQ funds. Staff has identified restricted funds in an existing county air quality impact fund in the amount of $24,666. This fund could be used for the bulk of the county's match, leaving a $9,754 shortfall. WeCycle will be responsible for up to $9,754, depending on the final CMAQ expenditure. And the board gave direction to move forward based on that direction. So this is really implementing the direction that we received as staff. And we just I could not recall those specifics going back to December 2011 when we were in our last meeting and GR was out. So my apologies for not having that here. And so in fact, it was not a new item. It was one that we'd anticipated.
questions? Ron?
Yeah, that was primarily my misrecollection. They said, weren't they supposed to cover the whole match? And they're supposed to cover the 9,000 plus match, and that's why I wanted to continue this conversation from its last scheduled dates. I will first say that I'm in favor of this supplemental budget, and I hope greatly that WeCycle meets all the goals that they are out representing that they'll meet. And when I actually asked the Board of County Commissioners about 2 months ago to have a follow-up on WeCycle, I think half of it was met, but the other half wasn't met on that follow-up. So I guess I'll ask the board again, at some point in the future, may we have a secondary follow-up on WeCycle. Really because, and I went back and got the December 6th thing, and I actually watched the full half-hour Granicus portion of that meeting to hear what the comments was. because I am getting comments now that it is on the street. People are saying, well, what's this WeCycle thing? You know, and I think this or I think that. And the secondary part of the follow-up, which I would like to have, which didn't happen in the last meeting, is are the goals being met? Because that was the primary, if you go back and watch the meeting on December 6, 2011, that's what most of the county commissioners' comments were, which is, you know, are you going to meet the trigger points? These are the terminologies of fundraising. Are you going to meet your goals in your financial statements on year to year? Is this going to be a sustainable business? And the follow-up that we had a couple weeks ago was more about where stations are going to be, you know, this and that, and you know, there were detailed financials put out as a representation of how this, you know, the assumptions of how this money that is taxpayer money would be put to use to mitigate air quality. And it gets back to the conversation we've just previously had, is how do we retrospectively go back and say, is this meeting the goals that they represented themselves to meet? And like I said, I mean, I am in favor of WeCycle. I'm a fan of it. I haven't used it here. I used it in New York when I was in New York, the program that they have there. But I also, as a representative at this table, people are saying, well, are they going to do what they set out to say they do, or are they going to come back to us in a year and say, we can't support the employees that we have, we can't support the maintenance that we have, we didn't get the sponsorship money that we have, we didn't get, you know, the revenue side things that we had, and that's really part of the follow-up that I'd like to see at some point in the near future. But I am in favor of going forward with this CMAQ money.
GR?
That's a lot of good questions and comments, Rob. To the first point that you had through that, in the general sense, yes. In our contract with WeCycle, we do have a provision that they do have to come before the board to give an update. And so that's written in black and white in their contract. As far as, you know, all of the targets and goals, I think Mirta would probably be best to answer any of those sorts of questions.
And it doesn't have to be answered now. This might be, again, it's maybe a different topic in terms of a follow-up on WeCycle than the allocation of the CMAQ funds that we've pretty much already agreed to. We're just making a budgetary adjustment here.
Rachel?
Yeah, I agree with the supplemental, and I support your suggestion, Rob. I'm going to leave it to John and GR and Mirta to work out when's the best timing for that. It doesn't make sense for me to do it in the middle of the summer season. And then, you know, I don't know what the timing would be best in the fall. So we'll get that report back, and we all have the same questions and all hoping for great success. But I sure don't want to say, tell us how it's going in the middle of July when, you know, we're not there.
I agree.
Okay.
But I would, if we do have a moment, I can give you a couple updates based on 3 weeks of operation, if you're interested. So.
Sure. Go ahead, Mirta.
Well, hopefully many of you have tried. I know several of you were at our launch parade. We had 100 bicycles, and what a tremendous momentum of energy. We ran out of WeCycles for people to use in the launch parade. People showed up on unicycles, families with burleys, little kids on their own bicycles. It was a true demonstration of this is a bike community, and we're excited for this program to launch. So the program launched, and it's been about 19 days. We've had over 1,800 rides. So we're looking at over 100 rides a day, or about 100 rides a day, which is fantastic. We have over 200 members signed up, seasons pass holders, and around 250 subscribers have signed up on a daily basis at this point. So we're exceeding our anticipations of a first 3 weeks in operation. That said, this is a new program. Everything takes time to adjust. Our first year is going to be full of learnings. This is the first implementation of this solution in a small resort community. Bike sharing is intimidating. I mean, figuring out how it works because of the high technological aspect of it, it takes that, there's a barrier of entry
which one needs to kind of, even when you pick up an iPhone, the first few steps are kind of intimidating, and once you get through that, then it works a little bit more smoothly. And bike sharing is the same way, and so that's why we're encouraging everyone to get season passes, which are very cost effective, because as several of you know, once you get to the dock with a season's pass, it eliminates the process of the screen. We're educating. A lot of our work this year is going to be education, figuring out the patterns. Certain stations are proving to be huge successes. The Aspen Valley Hospital station people are using it to commute into town for work. People are going back to Smuggler late at night. People are using the Aspen Club station very regularly. Clark's is getting a ton of usage at lunch. Those are the kind of stories that we're excited to share and to start to see the patterns develop. We do have a short season, and so it's going to take time to establish those patterns, to readjust, and we're committed to listening, to making adjustments where we can, and continuing to try to improve the program, knowing we are not going to meet every trigger point in the first year. But since we last met, Sotheby's has come on as our title sponsor. We are in the process of partnering with CH2M Hill at the Aspen Ideas Festival. Every Ideas Festival participant is receiving a bike pass to go to and from the Ideas Festival campus. So it's a fantastic implementation of a transit solution to reduce the impacts on the West End, thanks to your helping support this program. So far it's off to a great start. We hope people will try it. Come to one of our free demo Fridays so people have an opportunity to try it, have that first personal contact of the importance of lifting the seat, and we'll get you on your way and get you rolling.
That's great. Thanks, Mirta. Okay. Steve?
I am a subscriber to WeCycle, and I've ridden several times. I have an engineering mind, so I'm always trying to think of where would be better place to put stations and that sort of thing. But maybe by the end of the summer, I'll really be interested to get the kind of the end of the season report on it. And I totally support the supplemental budget for this, and I look forward to the whole program being successful, and realize you might have to tweak different things and move stations here or there or that sort of thing. But a conversation with John Wilkinson, he was in Washington, D.C., and they have a bicycle share program there, and he actually went on a 3.5-hour bicycle ride from station to station, checking his bike in, then getting another one out and continuing on. So he was within the half-hour limitation between each station. And I thought that was really a unique way to see Washington, D.C. So maybe people will be doing that here also.
Very well, good point.
So we have a nod of heads to approve the supplement. Great, thank you.
Thank you all. Come ride. I look forward to seeing you on bikes. Thanks so much.
Okay, that wrap up our MOIs?
That wraps up our MOIs and brings us to open discussion. I have one open discussion item. I'd like to introduce you to Jerry Peets. Jerry's just learned his first lesson in the timing of the BOCC meetings. We had him here at 2:15 to be introduced. Yeah, come on up here, and then Cindy. Jerry's our new wildfire mitigation coordinator, and I just wanted, Jerry's gosh, we're on about 1 week now, right?
Yeah.
A little bit over 1 week, so he's just getting started, but thought we'd give you a quick update on some of our activities and where we are headed. Jerry, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Hi.
Maybe.
So yeah, just a few days. I spent the first couple of days actually just going around meeting everybody and seeing where everybody was, but kind of jumped into a basic framework plan for the time frame that we have for this mitigation program, which is 3 months. We started out with, we're going to do assessments, education and preparedness for landowners, community outreach, public education, move into the mitigation planning and implementation part of it, and then down the road, the sustainability. I spent 2.5 days actually visiting with the 4 fire districts here and got their input on what areas are of concern. So we identified 11 subdivisions within the county, and prioritized 4 of them, 1 for each fire district. Each one's a little different, kind of new, unique approach. Prince Creek in Carbondale, Cypress Mountain Ranch in Basalt, Sinclair Road in Snowmass, and Red Mountain here in the Aspen Fire District. So we're working on a plan for each one of those and how we'll approach them for mitigation, evacuation, those sorts of topics. So basically, that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, the other issues, Jerry's been working closely with community development because there's an interaction as we do mitigation planning. Then how does that flow into our land use process? Because we have a permit requirement for removal of any tree over 6 inches in diameter. It's a clearing and grubbing permit. And so, Cindy, I can let you talk a little bit about that interaction and some of the coordination.
Well, one of the things that we talked about early on in this program and this season, obviously, is we want to get people to mitigate, on their properties so that we don't have the damage to the properties that could occur if people hadn't mitigated on their property. And the land use code for a number of years has followed the State Forest Service wildfire guidelines and suggestions for mitigation. And we have, when we have a land use application before us for a site plan, we typically tack on the wildfire conditions if someone's in high, moderate wildfire areas, which have been identified by the state as well. So we've tacked on those. We've been working with Mary Lackner, who, with the GIS component, was able to overlay all of the fire districts onto the Pickens County map and then show which properties have conditions on them from the land use approvals. So which properties really should already know that they need to be mitigating based on their approvals. And then from there, we were able to tie into the resolution of approval so that the fire districts can help us get that word out there when they're out there doing their assessments. They can say, hey, it looks as though you've been approved by Pickens County, you have a condition on your property to mitigate by these standards, and here they are, by the way. So we are working closely, hopefully, with the districts to be able to get more of that information out there on the ones that should be mitigating, but as you know, we don't really have the people power to go out and enforce all those conditions every year. So that's been very helpful. And we've created a process that we think will be more helpful to the landowners, basically to get the assessment from the fire districts. And then the fire districts are in agreement with us about the type of assessments, about the type of mitigation. And everyone's following the Ready, Set, Go and the state wildfire mitigation scheme, if you will, of thinning out vegetation. Then we're all on the same page, and we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone with the fire district out talking with people. And if the fire district sets up a mitigation plan, if you will, for the landowner, then what they will do is note that on the map that Mary in GIS has created for us, and then send us a copy of the mitigation plan. We're using a gizmo. It's kind of like a Google Earth map of the property with the property boundaries, and the fire assessment folks are able to actually draw on those maps, send us a copy for our files, and get it done. And therefore, no one, unless they really have questions or if there are other extenuating circumstances and issues, really have to come into our office, and we're not going to be having a clearing and grubbing, earth-moving permit process for this to occur unless there's a specific issue with the property. And we've gone through kind of a risk assessment on that. Sometimes when you have a scenic overlay, we've asked people to actually put in landscaping, but typically in at least the last 10 years, we've tried to make that compatible with wildfire mitigation. So that shouldn't be a problem. And then some of the areas that we're looking at here, such as Red Mountain, typically the scenic requirements have more to do with reflectivity of roof lines and that sort of thing, and don't have as much to do with the vegetation. So we think that hopefully there'll be very little overlap or incongruent kind of messages with the scenic overlay reviews we've done and the wildfire mitigation. So we have a process for it. Jerry and I are trying to get the word out with the districts, and also working with, next step is really to work with, in conjunction with the city of Aspen, and get key people together on some of the programmatic approaches that Jerry's going to do for Red Mountain and some of the other areas. A lot more specific kind of planning.
Good. Any questions for Jerry or Cindy?
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
All right.
Wow.
Oh,
I was going to say that at the start of this season, everything seemed so wet and like a lot of soil moisture. And now, a month or two later, we see this as like another Colorado wildfire season with a lot more fires than I think were anticipated. And our sense of complacency for right here kind of has disappeared to a large extent, at least in my mind, because there's a lot of real dry areas around right now already in this valley. And so it's really great you're on board and working on this, because it might prevent a disaster somewhere along the line.
Yeah, well, we'll keep the awareness up. You know, there's been a good publicity media blitz on this. We're doing the last Ready, Set, Go tonight in Carbondale. So expecting a good turnout down there, and just keep the ball rolling with that.
Rachel?
Let me ask you, has one of the Ready, Set, Go presentations been filmed for Grassroots TV so we can do repeat programming and broadcasts of that?
No, that was problematic because it goes in stations. There's 4 different stations and it rotates. So what I talked to Pat Bingham about was just kind of staging one.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
so
That's what I meant.
And we didn't want to do it while the program was going because we thought people would watch it on TV and then
Not participate.
but we are going to.
But you're going to do that.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
going to be, and we can do those anytime for any subdivision, any homeowners association, just, you know, do an abbreviated version and, you know, keep that going as long as it needs to go.
Yeah, well, I think getting it on Grassroots and having that contact information for a more specified HOA meeting would be great. It's amazing how many people watch that channel, or CGTV and Grassroots, you know, but that's a great way to multiply your appearances. So, thank you.
So I'd just wrap up by, you know, we're excited to have Jerry aboard. He's, you know, most of us I think know, but for the viewing audience, as most recently a deputy chief in the Basalt Fire District, has a lot of experience both in wildland fire and mitigation and planning. So he's the perfect fit for us coming into this program. I think what we've already learned in looking at the neighborhoods and then the needs is that each situation is unique. So each planning effort is going to be a little bit different in kinds of scope and what that outcome is going to be. It's a little bit different than we had originally conceived it, but I think as Jerry's gotten in and really started to work with the fire districts and experts on the field, we're seeing different needs. So we'll be checking back in with you from time to time as we move forward, but you'll be seeing focus and coordination efforts, at least in those 4 highest priority areas that the fire districts identified for us.
Good. Well, thank you, Jerry. Cindy?
All right, thanks.
Thanks. And that's all I have for open discussion.
Okay, so with that, I will call to order a special meeting, and I will accept the motion to go into executive session for the purpose of property negotiations under CRS 24-6-4024E, and if time allows, for attorney consultation, which would be under CRS 24-6-4024B.
So moved.
Second.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you, Grassroots.
All right.
We'll take about 10-minute break.